Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, April 13th meeting of the Finance Committee. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16th, 2020, the Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, a roll call of attendance will be taken. Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Mr. Maxwell.
Here.
Mr. Whitaker.
Here.
I'm of course here, and Ms. Nersessian informed me that she would be absent this evening. So make sure that we note that in the minutes. As far as minutes go, I owe you minutes, don't I, Mark? Because you sent them to me, but I was tied up last week, so I didn't get a chance to look at them. So we don't have minutes for last week, but we absolutely will have those in time for our next meeting. Speaking of which, we'll discuss a little further down the road, but we'll discuss what we need to do after we finish tonight. So the plan for tonight was to hear from the stipend committee. They had requested to meet with us again. And
if Joan doesn't show up, I watch their meetings and stuff. I can just give you a brief overview of what they recommended to the select board last night, and we can. Okay. It's not that complicated.
Okay. Well, you can do that, and as I said, hopefully, I don't mean
to speak for them, but if they're not here, in an effort not to sort of sit around.
Okay. Well, let's wait now, and we'll see if they join us a little bit. We'll just defer their agenda until. Defer them on the agenda until we have somebody willing to talk to us about that. Okay, so we'll just go right into TA updates from Travis.
So the majority of my talking points would be probably under other items. I sent out for everybody today the updated CARES. I also sent out a sheet, I believe it was probably yesterday, which DLS has provided a all CARES funding source in one spot sheet, which I highlighted Holliston, sent it out for the ones that DLS is now making estimates on the new ARPA funding, which they've labeled another acronym. And then also ESSER 3, which would be the school funding, which they put out an estimate on. Both of them are relatively in the ballpark of what we were expecting based on estimates that came from other groups. The MMA was the one that I had shared with everybody previously. So that was very helpful. The remaining balance of the CARES Act, as Chief Cassidy presented, is over $200,000 and has in their assumptions of funding certain things such as cleaning of municipal buildings through the end of the calendar year. Other than that, I did send out today a couple updates for budgets that the select board looked at last night based on new information, how that impacts what would be quote unquote my bottom line. And then additionally, 6 articles that are finance related that I think we can start discussing in earnest this evening, depending on the chair and your time. I did discuss quite a few of them yesterday with the capital subcommittee, which has been restructured with Vin as the chair, Tim and Ken. And so we can get into that this evening as well. The capital list was included in what I sent today. And then the full warrant, the numbering, I guess, would be to say, was sort of decided on last night, and where the select board is with that, which again we can discuss as.
Oh, Travis just
suddenly muted myself by trying to get dirt off of my my laptop. So the change that would happen with numbering at this point would be if articles are removed. I would say that at this point I was hoping to know if articles were going to be removed. The one that sort of came up last night with the select board is the acceptance of Summit Point Drive, which had some feedback from residents in that area that have concerns that they'd like to see fixed by the developer before the town accepts it, or know that when the town accepts it, those would be sort of handled. And the public hearing was continued until next Tuesday night. It's unclear to me if the developer will be able to address all those concerns. From a town perspective, I think, it's clear that the way that our engineer has sort of looked at it, we have a relatively small punch list from a town concern standpoint. But at the same point, we always have to consider where the residents in that area are with the developer, and make sure that we're not sort of accepting something that has outstanding issues for a number of our residents. So we'll see where that goes in the next week, essentially. But that is one that could potentially say, look, if this is not shored up in relatively quick order, things that are not necessarily the town specific concern, but a more holistic approach, that might move to October. Give them more time to address some of those concerns, make sure that the residents' issues are addressed. And so that's kind of where we are, right? We have, and I believe I provided it to Chris Kane, so it was in the Holliston Reporter today. I didn't add it because I had 5 attachments for the email I sent you earlier. And it was getting quite a few, but that numbering, and what I wanted to get to you today was kind of the articles so we could discuss tonight, the ones that have quote unquote, financial components, although a number of them, like road acceptances, always need to be discussed as well. But at this point, I think we have all of the articles that would be on there clearly, and the only thing now would be culling it back if anything would be pulled next Tuesday night.
Okay, Michelle, you had your hand up. And you're also muted.
I don't know if I can ask this now or if I should wait till we discuss COVID. I would just like an asterisk next to the items on the CARES list that will be continued when, I'd hate to say when CARES is over, but like additional crossing guard, is that something that's going to be ongoing, or is that just when there's CARES money?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are policy decisions that I don't think have an answer, right? I mean, I think at some point, the reason that it's sort of come up now is that we don't have the normal sort of volume on the bus. We have more people walking, and that sort of came up. So, right, I guess the answer would be if we got back to quote unquote normal bus use in the next school year, then no, I don't think they would go in perpetuity. And then, there's certainly ones like I think I've mentioned a few times, the 2 times a day high touch surface cleaning. I have no intention of continuing on once sort of we feel like that's not necessary, which, I mean, I think you could argue that we're approaching that point in the not too distant future. So you're right. I mean, we can do that, I guess, at some point to put asterisks to say that this will continue is difficult to do, because I think some of those decisions we're going to have to see. We'll have to deal with the information as we get it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Alford.
Yeah, so the Charles, the select board approved a part-time clerk for the collaborative, our vaccination collaborative last night, for $16,000. But that's FEMA reimbursable.
Yeah,
so it doesn't really change our CARES balance.
You're right. So essentially what we would do, and this was, if you remember, originally we had sort of been keeping a FEMA column, and then they changed their sort of, if cleaning of a public safety building is FEMA eligible, but cleaning of town hall is not. And so then it just, we sort of started separating it and all those things. Everything related to this regional vaccination site, which actually starts tomorrow at the Westboro Doubletree. Everything related to it is FEMA eligible. We had FEMA on the original call as all the towns were sort of talking about it to discuss this. It is all FEMA eligible. The reason that we wanted to do it through CARES is to make sure that we have a place to sort of charge it to at the moment that is not the general ledger. But the idea would be that we would then put in for reimbursement through FEMA, as all these towns will. And the only reason we didn't centralize that is that somebody was going to have to put up all the cash for this, right? The one town is putting up the rental for the Doubletree to put all of the multiple administrative part-time staff that needed to be hired. It was determined that it would be easier if it was requested that other towns sort of kick in, hire your own person or 2 to put towards it. And that person did start at that facility today.
And just to be clear, so Holliston is one of the towns that the residents and town employees can apply, can look for a vaccination from, but it's a limited number, but they can go on any of the days this week that it's open.
Yeah, so you need an appointment as all, but now if you were to look in your area, this is going to pop up, right? If it depends the way that you do it. In the pre-registration form, this would now pop up depending on what you put for the radius that you're willing to travel and those types of things. So yeah, the site is live tomorrow.
Okay. I'm glad it's human eligible 16,000. I just worry that at some point it's going to be like we're going to have trouble getting enough shots to make it worth it, and at some point there's just going to be so many shots available that no one's going to need it. But
that was going to be my question, was about with the J&J thing going on now and their supplies basically dropping off the map. Does that change? Maybe that's a question we save for the chief later.
J&J is only 5 or 6% of the shots that have been given. I mean, so
correct. But what I'm saying is that from a supply side, they were expected to ramp up. That was supposed to be the thing that alleviated the vaccine supply tightness, right? No,
Moderna and Pfizer, they're supposed to have enough by the end of May, I think.
Okay, so regardless, it's not.
And then they also approved. I'm sorry to harp on this, but $11,000 for 2 water fill stations, and that was for COVID reasons. And since we're sort of getting towards the end of it, it seems a little late. I don't know. That seems like a pretty large expense for. Is that a big problem at Town Hall? People getting water out of a water fountain?
So I think the chief worded it, and I will try to word it the same way, which is that there was discussion over a spread of COVID related to the use of a common water bubbler at some point at one of the facilities that was mentioned of the 2 to have this water, these water systems installed. So that was how he worded it last night, probably more eloquently than I just did, but either way. And then the cost associated with replacing it, and it's the one that you see in the airport where you can put the bottle under and it fills the bottle, and so you don't have to touch it and do all those. The one at Town Hall is not effective to use to fill up anything, and so included in that is the work to sort of reconstitute that area that would fit that in what is right now a 1970s model of a water bubbler, so to speak. So yeah, 11,000 is the estimate on it. And if Chief Cassidy hops on later, he can get into greater detail with that.
Okay, it's phenomenal. I mean, anyway, it's far be it from me to question the select board's wide decisions on how to spend that money.
The question I have is,
then we're all set.
The question I have about that though is because it's in Town Hall, does that mean that we have to? It has to be a hand pump dry well that we have to sink to match the condition of the water supply 300 years ago because it's a historic structure. That's
That's why it's.
I'm joking, but I'm half serious. Like, is this something where because it's a historic structure, we're limited in what we can do in there?
It's got to be 250-year-old wood.
That's right. We have to find the original metal worker that made the door knockers for the original Town Hall to fashion the new water thing. So, okay. Any other updates, Travis?
I see Vin's hand raised, and then
yes.
There you go.
I have a question, not so much about that, but it segued into the doors. I drove by the other day, and I saw them. Where do we stand with the wonderful doors? That's taken 5 years to get up and.
So if you look at Town Hall from the front, the doors on the left are complete. I would advise, feel free to come use them. They're wonderful, and they open and close when you want them to. The doors to the left, when you look at the building, I believe have a timeline that would be completed relatively soon. And then the last stop would be the door as you enter from the back. That door is getting progressively hard to close. There is a system where you lift and then throw your shoulder into it. So I can't wait for that to happen. The problem there, so the ADA compliant entrance to the building is in the front to the right of the building as you go up the ramp, right? That's the ADA compliant. In reality, the majority of people, including residents that access the building, use the back door because that's where the majority of our parking is. when they go into the replacement of that door, we're going to have quite a few people have to walk around. So I'm not looking forward to that, but I am looking forward to it because that's the door that the majority of people use and is getting really bad. So almost done in the front. The left is done. The right is almost done. And then they'll move to the back, which will be inconvenient, but much needed.
Awesome. Thank you.
And then with that, to the chair, I would say everything else that I have is either budget or warrant, which all seem to fit under number 5. So I'll leave it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do that then. Okay, so moving on. We need liaison updates. None from the schools this week because of the delay. I don't know if I guess I'll update everybody in case they haven't heard. There was a scheduled mediation session, which I had mentioned at a prior meeting that was scheduled for tomorrow. That has now been pushed out 2 more weeks. So that obviously complicates matters for us because now the mediation will be beyond our last meeting, basically. And obviously, pending the outcome of that, we don't know what the situation is, but we'll have that discussion under the budget with regards to what we do about the schools. But what I would say is that because of that, there isn't much to update. Obviously, there's a little bit of public PR going on between the union and the school committee, but that's none of our concern in the sense that that's their purview. So, but yes, because there's no agreement there, that obviously is going to impact us later on when we talk about budget. So, I don't know if anybody else has any other liaison updates. I don't see anybody jumping up, so we'll move on from that. Okay, we just talked mostly about the pandemic, and the chief is not here. Travis, do you know if the chief is planning on attending tonight? Like, is he, because a lot of times he's either here at the beginning or he has a conflict.
I haven't talked to him specifically about tonight, so let me text him. But
okay, well, no big deal. We can just get on to the heart of the meeting today, which is the budget prep and warrant prep for town meeting. What I would suggest, and I had talked to Travis about this earlier, is that he sent out a list of articles. I would like to go through that list and discuss 2 things. One is whether we have all the information we would want to make a recommendation on an article. If not, give that, either get it from Travis real time or put it on Travis's to-do list, so to speak, to get back to us on so that we have all the information we need to make a recommendation. Or if we think we have everything and everybody's comfortable with certain things, whether we could just move on to taking initial votes. I will say that I had planned on trying to vote the easy budgets tonight, but because Sue was unable to attend, she requested that if possible we delay that so we have unanimity in our voting so we can take care of that. But I do want to, just to be clear, I want to make sure that when we're done today, that everybody's in a position where they're ready to cast votes or they're going to get the information they need to cast votes, right? Because theoretically we have one more meeting scheduled, which is the 27th, and that meeting everything must be finalized for the report. Related to that is next week. As you know, in ordinary non-COVID times, we never meet during vacation week because we usually never get a quorum. So the question I have is, Monday's Patriots Day. So Tuesday, it makes no sense for us to meet because the select board will not have met after yesterday. So the question is, would we be able to get a quorum on any, for me, Wednesday wouldn't work. And Friday probably wouldn't work. So for me, it's probably only Thursday. But the question is, could we get a quorum on one of the other days? I could try to make it work one of the other days if necessary. So,
I could do Thursday.
I mean,
I could also do Thursday.
Okay. What about Vin, Tim? Would you guys be good?
I'm good on Thursday.
Okay.
Tax day,
That-
that's next week. Yes,
No,
fine.
tax days in May.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes,
And,
I'm totally available.
okay. Oh, geez. Now he's actually using the thumbs up. Oh man, we're really reaching. We're plumbing the depths now. So Now hold it. Let me see. I want to see if it doesn't do it. See, I was going to say it doesn't show me on the side like with the raised hand. It should show me a little thumbs up on the participant list. But anyway, okay. So I will post us for next Thursday, but I'll keep an eye on the situation to see whether we need to meet that Thursday, because obviously Thursday to Tuesday isn't really that much of a difference. But we might need the second meeting, depending on if I think that we're at a point where we're mostly stable and we just need to take a bunch of votes, then we can do that in one day. If it's something where I think we're going to need a lot of debate, we might need 2 meetings. But okay, so I'll post this just in case for next Thursday.
So should we bring up now though any sort of
Yes,
things that we want people to think about?
absolutely. That's I was just going to get into that. So now let's get into the budget. Let's start with the warrant articles because Travis had just sent those out today. So if you look at your email, if you haven't already, there's the email he sent out with different files with different pieces that, let me find it here. There we go. Yeah, I sent it out before. And I don't know, I guess I can share it. Yeah, I guess I can share it this way. So we have
just the list up.
Well, I was going to say you have it in different files, but if you just pull up any one of those, the draft, the 2 files that are the draft articles, pull up either one of those and we'll just go through it. As I said, make sure that there are no questions, make sure that we get all the information needed. And if everybody thinks they know where they are, and then we can just, move on. And as I said, just take the formal vote when Sue is with us. So are you going to share, Travis? You're sharing, Travis?
Sure.
Okay. And I was going to do it, but it sounded like you had it right there. So
I do. All right. So I gave 2 groupings. One was Article 30 through 34, and the other one was 23 through 25. So let me just
whichever one you want.
Yeah. All right.
We're like Powerball. The order doesn't matter.
So let me just show the total list here, which is the one out there. If it's in green, discussion over potentially consent agenda to move us along. The first grouping I mentioned is 23 through 25 is all related to establishing either a stabilization fund or revolving funds. So if I pull that down and the file. So this is what was shared. So the pension liability stabilization fund is a conversation that I know had been happening before I got involved. I think Mary had done quite a bit of work. Mary and I discussed this with liaisons as we progressed here. So that would be the first one.
So, I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, go ahead. Since you're about to raise it now, go ahead.
Okay, so Travis, I was watching your meeting last night, and you made the comments that you thought that because we're going to put it into print managed by Prim, that you thought that would be sort of enough to sort of demonstrate what we were planning to use it for.
Right. So I mean, the path we would go down to get this into PRET essentially is establishing the fact and putting the money into a fund that literally could not be used if it were not for that express purpose. And so, not only, I think that one of the concerns that have been expressed is that at some point in the future, a future select board comes in and says it would be nicer if this was a stabilization fund for the Tesla fleet, and it just gets repurposed. And at the end of the day, I do want to make sure that it is clear that the purpose of this is going to be to address a long-term liability. But I think at the same time, part of the conversation have been, should it be established the same way, some of the same steps that have been through the OPEB trust fund. And at the end of the day, when Mary and I look at this and go through all the steps, it doesn't operate the same way. And so there's reasons that it wouldn't. At the same point, I agree that we want to make it very clear that this is not a fund that will be repurposed for any other purpose, that the steps that we're going to take are only allowed because of the fact that the main purpose of the fund is related to the town's pension liability, and that would be the only thing it could be used to address.
So I'm willing to support this at the Maytown meeting, but I still want a bylaw. Or so I still want something that codifies that the only purpose of this is for pension related expenses, whether it is, transferring money into PRIT to help sort of offset ups and downs, or paying directly, or so. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with it. But I still would like something that really sort of codifies in our laws that this is what that's for. We don't need to go through all the hoops of getting special legislation or anything like that, but just before we put any real money into it, which I know your plan is for October, using a lot of free cash / that, or really using the money from the stabilization, but then free cash to refill it so that we don't change the balance of free cash. I really would like a bylaw. I mean, that is, I don't know where everyone else feels, but I've been pretty consistent with that at the beginning, and I get what you're saying, and I think that a reasonable person might, but who knows? 15 years from now, well, you'll probably still be here, but hopefully I'm not on the finance committee. That we just don't run into a tight situation and someone says, all right, well, let's just withdraw that money and use it for whatever. That I don't know how everyone else feels. If I'm the only one, then I'm the only one.
Let's hear from Mr. You sit down. Let's hear from Vin, because I'll comment on that in a little bit. I just want to give everybody a chance. Go ahead, Vin.
I think that makes sense, but first, can we make sure we can do a bylaw and it actually has the teeth that Dan, and I agree, we need to make sure it's not being used, and even in the future, hey, we're having a deficit, we need to fund. This is being used solely for the purposes of the future of the pension liability. We need to have a process in place, but so I think Travis just needs to ask, who's our attorney? I'm blanking right now.
Jay Tyler.
Ask Jay and see what his thoughts are, and if he can come up with a draft bylaw.
To be clear, a bylaw could be changed. It would take another two-thirds
right.
vote, and then they would have to take this money out with the
right.
2/3 vote. So it would be a huge hurdle to doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
no, and so I would just point out, right, the bylaw, I can certainly talk to Jay on. I think, one of the items here that you just mentioned that I want to make clear so that everybody understands why I'm saying this is different than the OPEB trust fund, right? The pension trust fund is the Middlesex retirement system on the town side. On the school side, it's MTRS, the Mass Teachers Retirement System. Both of those systems, right, the employee pays a portion of the salary into the system. The town pays towards the unfunded liability, and then the system actually pays out the benefits to a retiree. The reason the OPEB trust fund is set up is that hypothetically in the future, the way GASB has sort of envisioned this, is that all these towns will in the future do something similar where contributions go into the OPEB trust fund and all healthcare costs come out of the OPEB trust fund. That's not where we are now. That's not where any town is. But that's why OPEB trust funds are trust funds specifically. The idea behind the stabilization fund is that we understand that there's a liability and we are legally obligated to fund both Middlesex and MTRS in different processes while employees continue to pay into it. But there's additionally a liability the town continues to pay down. We have a funding schedule to get there by 2036, I want to say is Middlesex's funding plan, that we understand that at some point, as we get closer to that, if the returns in the system of Middlesex is not going to be good, there's a possibility that our annual legally required contributions are going to blow up our budget, right? I mean, that's one potential solution that this fund protects the town from. So it is possible that at some point in 5, 10, 15 years, the town may look at this and say, all right, we're legally obligated to increase our contribution to Middlesex retirement system year over year by money that we don't have in the budget without sort of substantially reducing something. The stabilization fund can be used to do that. It also is a way for us to essentially say, we understand there's a liability, but we're not gung-ho on simply throwing all additional money to address that liability into Middlesex because we have a couple questions, right? They've performed, they've done okay in the past few years, but they've had a history, and we just want to make sure that, one, we're addressing the liability, but we're not fully getting in the boat of Middlesex. And if in the future the town decides, no, what is the best way to handle the money is to put it all into Middlesex, get that actuarially situated so that the funding ratio is in the 100% range, then a future town, meeting can decide to do that. But it's really a way to protect the town from a number of different angles. And it may be at some point used to balance an increased contribution related to something that's kind of outside of the town's control. So that's why it's different than the OPEB trust.
Right. And I think that just to comment, I guess to, Michelle and Vin in a second, but just to comment on, I don't think anybody's disagreeing that it's different than OPEB. I think that the concern is the use you've defined just now, we're fine with, at least I'm fine with.
Absolutely.
But we just want to codify it, because the problem fundamentally is, or the problem you want to avoid, again, as it doesn't apply to probably anybody on this call, but you don't want to get to the situation where, 10, 15 years from now, it's this pot of money and the temptation is too great to take something from it. This is what our federal government does, right? They put away money and then they take it at the first opportunity and then say, we don't have money for anything, right? So I think that the concern is not that, hey, we want to treat this exactly like OPEB. It's that we want to treat it like OPEB in the sense that we want to have some lockdown that makes it very hard for it to be used for something other than its intended purpose. Right?
Yeah, I get it.
Anyway, okay, Michelle, you were next.
I was just wondering if we need an oversight board like we do for OPEB. I forgot the name of the official.
Well, we have the OPEB Trust Board, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's set up by law. I certainly, I think really the guiding documents that we've discussed here, by law, certainly policy to go with this particular article to follow by a bylaw should sort of dictate a number of the things that we're talking about, right? So just as an example, right, if in the future the idea was, the annual required contribution legally is going to go up by 10%, right? Or, there's caps to protect us. But we agree as a town that for the next 2 budget cycles, we will go up above 10% to catch up or something like that. That in those instances, or what specific instances we feel comfortable using the stabilization, and we write that down as part of that, then there's not necessarily a body. It would be following what we're sort of putting in place. So I think a policy to start with a bylaw, as to use Dan's phrase earlier, when we get closer to the sort of larger dollars, I think we could certainly accomplish the same thing that you're talking about in terms of an overseeing body.
I mean, I wouldn't even mind if it was the same group of people, but it seems like there should be.
The bylaw could just say the OPEB Trust Board shall act as the. I don't know if that means you probably just do that. The OPEB Trust Board will act as the overseer of this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you do see similar things. So what happened for most towns on the pension side is that towns had their pension boards overseeing OPEB, to which point PERAC eventually said, you are not the same thing. Stop having your pension systems oversee your OPEB. They're separate things. And that's how trust boards came to be, excuse me. But at this point, to have it go the other way, I think would be fine. But I'll take a look at that as well. I'm the chair of the OPEB Trust Fund, so at some point I'm involved in either of these scenarios.
Okay, Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, I just want to add, it's probably going to be sooner than long term, because if you look at the projected growth for the pension contributions, they're projecting anywhere from 6 to 8%. And if you look this past year, we're looking at a 10, 11% increase. So the money we're putting in is going to even out what we have to contribute. That's my thinking of how this will be used. This isn't really so much it will be for the future, but the liability is going to be here sooner than we're expecting, because we can't handle the growth of this liability. So just thinking, everybody's thinking long term. My opinion is it's probably going to be closer sooner than later that we're going to be dipping into the money in order to even it out. And we're not going to we won't be able to afford if it continues growing like it is and what it's projecting. So that's it.
Okay, Dan? Yeah,
and just to follow up, Travis, so basically all I'm looking for in a bylaw is essentially what you just basically laid out is what you saw the fund doing. I would like to see some sort of guardrails around how much can be used to sort of pay for the sort of ballooning, if you will, only that, it should be stated somewhere that if the fund grows, if the contribution we need to take grows from 1 million to 1.5 million in a year, we can't take $1 million out of it to pay, because of course money is fungible, right? So you just got to be careful that people don't sort of start taking all, because then your essence are rating it to pay for other things in town. But yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. Just like, we don't want to limit ourselves to not be able to do what we want to, what the fund is for. But I also don't want to have the ability to do things that we do not intend for the fund to do.
Right. And to be honest, I mean, that's, we're the article is titled Pension Liability Stabilization Fund, right? So if it's being sold to the town as that, then we got to make sure it stays that way, right? So, and then again, I think that, so let me ask a broader question of the membership, which is, it sounds like everybody's on board with this concept of the stabilization fund and creating it, right? So this detail of, how we govern, how it's overseen and how it's managed and how we make sure that there are guardrails on it to prevent it from being, misused, so to speak. I think Travis, you got that message pretty clearly. So let's let him think about how we want to do that. But is there any other information anybody would need on this article? And I did ask Travis this, so I'll share this with you before. I mean, I asked this before, but I'll share this with everybody, which is the estimated cost. As you know, when we do our annual payment, we get a kind of a quote of pay at once discount, and that discount we've put towards our liability. So that 43,524 represents the amount of our discount, quote unquote, for that's going to be used to seed the fund. So that's why it's kind of a bizarre amount.
Can I just one clarification thing? I'm in support of doing this now with the $43,000. In the fall, though, when the bigger dollar amount is going to be looked to be put in, I mean that I will not be in favor of it if we do not have an accompanying bylaw.
Okay, duly noted for Travis, not me, since I don't write the bylaws.
No, but I'm just saying like that.
Yeah, no.
I don't want to hold up progress. I don't want to. A lot of work and thought has gone into this, and that's what we asked for.
But I think that based on what I'm hearing, that's kind of the consensus of the committee is we want to see some action on the making sure it stays focused on its intended purpose. So anybody need anything else from Travis on Article 23? Okay, then let's move to Article 24.
Okay. This one I think I've discussed a little bit as well. I think the way it was pitched last year was very different. It had a lot of, it was very different. So what I'm talking about at this point, I think we're all familiar, and I think I presented to the group previously, but there's 3 revenue components of the solar project in Marshall, which is going to be coming online in this coming fiscal year. The 2 largest components, which will be set in stone, are going to be the lease and the pilot payment. Pilot as in payment in lieu of taxes. Those are set to go to the general fund. We've assumed a portion of that in FY22 as we won't have the full year. $400,000 essentially will be the lease plus pilot payment that will go into the general fund. The assumption in FY22 in my model is $150,000. There is a third revenue source, which is much less significant and will fluctuate based on the output, quote unquote, net metering of the solar plant at Marshall. It is estimated that it will be in the $50,000 to $70,000 range. With, if we're, there's a lot of snow on it in the winter, you're in the 50 range. And if it's, you got a pretty mild winter and they remain uncovered, you could hit 70. So the idea would be to have that revenue source, essentially fund this, be the primary funding source of this revolving fund. I think we've discussed through our solid waste discussion that we're going to have some challenges, specific to the recycling market in town. As all communities will. Additionally, the real sort of connection here is the recycling center at Marshall, with the idea that there's quite a few ideas that have come not only from our new sustainability coordinator, but facilities manager, our DPW that has been operating this the facility for a while, and feedback from the community that would say, there's quite a few things we could do to make that a better a better system for town, add some capabilities there, make it work better, that we could be essentially using what we're doing now at Marshall to support that. Additionally, there's been a few things that have come along, and I use them as an example, not because the dollars are that substantial, but for example, Matt Zedek added a textile drop off at Marshall Street where, you can now put in used clothing. We collect revenue from that. The first check we got was $200. Again, it's not the dollar that I'm saying, it's the new revenue source sort of idea, that all of those things would now be going into this fund and then supporting any new initiatives at the recycling center to make it work better. And potentially if, the need was not there for, equipment or improving the level of service at the recycling center or recycling throughout town, that, part of or all of the sustainability coordinator could also be charged, taken off of the tax levy and sort of charged here, certainly as a component that he'd be involved, or the person would be involved with the operation of recycling. And so, I think the only thing, this is the model as you see the table here. The biggest issue that I've seen, and I think we can work through or make sure it's clear, is when we say receipts from the recycling center, there are receipts from the recycling center that go through the treasurer collector's office that will continue to be general fund revenue. So we want to make sure that it's clear that we do not intend to do all sort of stickers would go to this fund. That's any revenue that was currently going to the general fund through our model would not be redirected to this. So we'll need to make that clear, which I think I can do. I've got a little feedback already on that. But otherwise, the new revenue, so to speak, from Marshall Street related to net metering, and then the new revenue sources that have been identified through the sustainability coordinator would be essentially what goes into this fund. 60,000, the limit that I have for the first year. Again, when you're setting up a revolving fund, you're setting it potentially at a limit that might be over what you spend. And in the first year, or really usually the first 3 years of a revolving fund, it's between the town accountant and whoever's sort of overseeing it, in this case, myself, to make sure that we're not running it in the red and not overextending. But if 60,000 went into it, then we would have the ability to essentially spend up to $60,000 for the purpose that I stated.
Okay, Mr. Whitaker.
So this is these couple words you have in here that says town net metering, and that these words have been thrown around a lot. Well, not a lot, but the few times we've talked about these things, those words have been thrown out. And usually, at least in my experience, there's a third word associated with that, and that's credit. And what I'm just, maybe it's just the difference between how the town operates a solar facility versus how I would operate a solar facility. But I don't see a dime of net metering credit. And that just means that I own, that much. The electricity company owes me that electricity now, but I don't see a dime of it as far as real money goes. Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious. Maybe it's just my misunderstanding of how the town-wide would operate, but I'm just kind of scratching my head on those words.
Yes. So this does not work the same way that you with solar on your roof will work, right? You're getting a credit towards your bill from electric. We, on the other hand, will be getting, there's two ways that it can work. And there's the way that it has worked for municipalities who have done this, which I'm very much hoping is the way that this is going to work, which is everything generated, we get a cut of, and the only process that we see is our cut of that, which is the estimated $50,000 to $70,000. That money comes to us. We see essentially all of the financials that go into it and why that number is our number based on our agreement. The other way it can work is that all of the money that's generated through the output of the system comes to us, and then we owe the money back that is not our cut of that money, which is another reason why a revolving fund is substantially important. So all of that does not run through your general fund. Now, no town has had to go through the second process I just defined, and we could certainly have Beth Greenblatt explain sort of the implications if that were to be the case, but it would just be administratively a nightmare for us, but one that we would have to put up with. But at the end of the day, the majority of towns, what you get is the output of the system. Here's your cut of it. Here's your check, and here's all the background for your own files, and that's the end result of municipal solar output. I see a thumbs up.
Okay, Dan.
So this is certainly better than the previous version of this, where all the money was going into a fund. One thing I would ask, though, is under the other requirements, could we add notification to the Finance Committee? And the sort of the reason I ask it, I know there are a lot of revolving funds, and we are not certainly kept apprised of every single dime that's spent out of those, but most of those are costs that are pretty clear, like the building inspector fees, paying the building inspectors, those kind of there's a much more of a discretionary use of the money, and I think that it's something that the Finance Committee, I mean, for this one, I mean, in some ways I'd rather have a consultation with the Finance Committee before spending, but I'm willing to accept at least notification of the Finance Committee.
I've never seen that before. Let me take a look at it. Let me ask before I take a look at it. I think I understand what you're saying, but would you be saying like on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, or on a warrant basis, which would be weekly?
It depends on how the money is being spent. If you're writing lots of $20 checks and all these tiny little things are going in and out of it,
that's how I see it. So
I don't want to know that. I'm thinking if there are big projects, or you're deciding to pay the sustainability coordinator out of it, or something like that. That kind of thing. What I mean? I certainly do not need every single. If there are tons of debits and credits that are going in and out of this thing, that is not what I want. It's more the sort of either the overall picture on a monthly or quarterly basis, or if there are large tickets that are being made, decided to utilize and taking things off of the taxpayer funded things and moving them into this, that kind of that would be kind of what I'm asking for. I certainly am not trying to create a reporting burden for anybody.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think that under the all information accessible to the Finance Committee upon request model, that you have access to that information. I guess putting it in the requirement of I think we can accomplish what you're talking about. I'm not sure as a requirement. I see how it'll work, but let me take a look.
Sure. I mean, my thinking is rather than having to proactively ask you for it, I'd rather just be sent it.
Yeah, let me take a look.
But again, I don't need all the if it's $20 here and $30 here, that I don't want.
Gotcha.
Okay, Tim.
So I'm a little fascinated with this net metering idea because it's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. So is this percent that we're getting paid from the solar facility something that's part of the lease agreement with the company, or is this like a fee that we're going to be charging them?
No, it's part of the way that this deal has always been structured has been the three revenue components. So the net metering has always been involved in it, and so it's part of the agreement. It is not the lease, right? The lease is the amount per month that we have over the life of which has been extended to 25 years, and then the pilot is based on the agreement that they have with the Board of Assessors, which actually nets out essentially with the lease amount, but that was always going to be in the $400,000 range. And then the net metering has always been, is one of the arrangements that municipalities have with these types of projects. And actually Tina Hine is raising her hand, so she may have a more eloquent answer. But I mean, this has been from the moment I've got involved in this, has always been part of the discussion.
Okay. And then my other question is, does this just get passed on to the consumer as one of those myriad of line item fees that a consumer pays in their bill?
I mean, this is going in the grid. I mean, in terms of you're talking about like a Holliston resident is going to see the net metering going to the town. So I think what you may be connecting this to is the other agreement that we have in town, where you can the adder that was sort of part of the whole component of paying for the sustainability coordinator. These are different sort of scenarios. That is something where a Holliston resident would see something particularly in the bill as related to the adder, quote unquote. this net metering is part of essentially the agreement that impacts what Eversource is paying out, and this energy is going into the grid, which they're using. That's why they're involved very heavily in which pole this is going through and all that. So, I mean, it's a added cost that goes into the generation of electricity, and therefore it would be, but you would not see it as a particular line as a Holliston payer of electricity.
Okay, thank you.
Just remember, it's a generation facility, right? So the net metering is associated with the town taking, as part of the lease agreement, taking a percentage of, like we do with Pinecrest, where you get a fixed lease fee plus a percentage of the revenue. That's essentially what the net metering is it's saying for every, kilowatt hour they generate, we get they sell it for a certain amount and we get a little piece of that. So, okay, Tina, you wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, and I was moving from the car into the house, so it got disconnected. You may have already covered this, but this is not a public project, so the energy is not sold back to Holliston residents. So I just want to clarify that. And I think it's about 12 cents a kilowatt hour. That's our cut, so to speak, from the power generation. So that's the net metering piece of it. So again, it's a pretty small amount of money. That's what's generating the 60 to 75,000 that Travis was referring to earlier.
Okay, thank you. So Travis, since nobody else has their hand up, I had a couple of questions on this. First one is, the way it's structured, it says that the expenditure limit is 60,000, but as with most revolving funds, it doesn't have a absolute balance limit. Right. So, one of the things that's why I said, like, your estimate of, let's say 40, 50, 60,000 a year is what's going to be put into this fund, right? The way this is written right now, if hypothetically, through some bonanza, we had, a global warming and we got more net metering out of it or something, right? I mean, that's the only thing that concerns me is, while it's limited to 60,000, do we want to do something to limit the absolute balance cap in there and say that any amount more than 100,000 or whatever gets swept into the general fund on an annual basis or something like that?
I would look higher than that. I don't have an issue with what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I just picked that number. So
yeah, no. So, like, for example, and the reason I say that specifically is one of the larger components that has been pitched to me that I don't have on the capital plan would be something in the effect of, if we could, because a lot of what goes through that facility at the moment is cardboard. We have an issue with, the way that it's collected, yada, yada, yada. One of the things is, as you see in another town, they have a compactor to do this. This is what it costs. It's really not going to fit or prioritize it with a number of other things. Through this fund, if there was a balance that was built up over, let's say, multiple cycles, and that equipment could be purchased through this to support the recycling center operationally. I don't think that we'd want to have the balance to say we never wanted to get X high that was within reason, because there may be those types of purchases. But as a sort of rule of thumb of what you're saying, I don't have an issue with that. Additionally, I think with all revolving funds and the way that I've seen it in Holliston, is not this way, but a number of people, especially as revolving funds, are supported sometimes by people whose salaries are charged directly to the general fund. You can have indirect cost analysis that shows we've used tax supported dollars to support this revolving fund, and so within a budget, the revolving fund would pay an indirect cost payment to the general fund. And then you build that into your local receipts. I don't see that necessarily in the first however many years of this either, but I think in all of our revolving funds, we need to be looking at that to see if the balances are growing because we're not sort of capturing what the general fund should be receiving for what the work that's being done on the general fund supported salary side.
Right.
That's just more of a general statement on how Holliston's handled the revolving funds, but I would say yes. I think it could have a cap. Let me take a look at what that cap should be when I look at what Dan mentioned in terms of the other requirement for the reporting.
Yeah. And again, the way I suggested it doesn't have to be the way it's done, but I guess the concern that I have is like when you look at like our building department, right? You know, when we have boom times in the building department, we also have boom times with the inspectors, right? So so even though in the long term it tends to tick up a little bit, because obviously the revolving fund, you want it to have a slight positive bias so it's not insolvent, right? But there's a direct correlation where you'd say, okay, if we see a bunch of building activity so that permit fees goes up, there are going to be a corresponding increase in inspection fees, right? With something like this, it's less direct because the expenses payable, as you said, are related to operation, but you know, the sun shining more and generating more in net metering doesn't necessarily change anything operationally, right? So you could build up faster in that fund, and there should be, you know, that's why I brought it. And I'll let you take care of it. I don't want to discuss the details. But the other thing that I was going to say about the wages part of this is, while I support it, I'm concerned about the wages piece, right? Because, again, to use the building department as an example, when you pay when you pay a permit fee and that goes into the revolving fund, that comes with an inspection that has essentially a known fee associated with it, right? So there's generally not going to be a case where we don't have enough money to pay the inspector because the permit fees are structured or theoretically structured to cover that. Same with parks, right? Now, parks have a different, you know, I know they're different statutorily, but it's the same type of thing where if the Parks Department is paying wages for running a program, right, that's directly tied to the revenue of the program, so that if the program happens, they know they have the money for the wages. In this particular case, saying you can pay wages from it, there's no direct correlation between the revenue that's coming in and the wages you might be paying. And because of that, I have a little bit of trepidation about, you know, do we want to say that you can pay wages out of this thing, right?
Yeah, so let me explain.
Contract costs, like for the sustainability coordinator, that might be different because that's an unburdened.
So let me explain
Go ahead.
exactly what the wages reason is for this. You're right. So our sustainability coordinator is not wages. He gets a 1099, not a W-2.
Exactly. That's why I was saying that.
But the person at the recycling center that we have is somebody who does get a W-2, and they're essentially, sort of part-time staff through the DPW. And when we charge that person somewhere, we're charging it to the DPW. And when we, if we need to add hours because of a natural disaster or something like that, to have more, have it open, to have brush and those types of things, we are limited in the ability to scale up the access to the recycling center that we often get calls about from residents in peak need, to be able to open it, have it open to the public, and have it staffed. And so by allowing us to have this ability to charge additional hours and potentially be able to have a little bit more flexibility in opening the recycling center as in response to those types of incidents, that's where I would be looking to charge wages. It would not be, we have a full-time person at the recycling center now, and that's where this person gets paid out of. It's really the flexibility to sort of say, in response to this, we're opening the recycling center for additional hours, which we do from time to time. But in that instance, those hours are getting charged to the DPW's personal services budget.
So would it be better then, given what you just said, to phrase it and say costs, supplemental wages and expenses, basically to say it's not used for paying base wages, it's used for paying supplemental wages that are related to the operation of the recycling center, which would allow you to pay for the theoretically, entirely the person, if the person's hours at the recycling center, but would specify that it can't be used, as you said, like this, because again, to use your example, if the plan is that DPW pays for some amount of this person's time, and then the delta, the extra hours that they work at the recycling center are paid for out of this fund, that's supplemental wage. Do you get to a point where you say, okay, and the reason I'm raising this is because of what we went through with the ambulance fund when it was a revolving fund, right? Which is when we were in times of financial stress, the number of hours that got charged to that fund changed to make the fire department budget work better, right? So that's the situation I'm trying to avoid, is right. We don't want to say, okay, well, and I'll just pick numbers for argument's sake. Let's say the person works, 30 hours a week or, 25 hours a week for the DPW and works 10 hours of recycling. You don't want to get into a situation where when we're saying, okay, that the economic times are not that great, and then suddenly this fund is shouldering 15 or 20 hours of the DPW person's time, because it can be, even though they're only working still 10 at the recycling center. That's kind of what I'm, it is specified that it's related to the operation of the recycling center and sustainability. So theoretically, I guess that covers you, but that was my other point was, because the coordinator is a contract service, do you want, saying costs, I guess, covers it, but I was like, do you want to say, wages, specify that it's contract costs for the sustainability coordinator or something like that, or, your professional services costs. I don't know. Anyway, you can think about it, but
at the end of the day, the way it's written, I think covers everything that I have in mind. I understand what you're saying. I don't have an issue in writing supplemental wages specific to the way I just mentioned it, but supplemental wages also, if I was coming in cold looking at that saying, what is supplemental wages referring to in this instance, I would think it's probably more like, that almost sounds more like bonuses or something that is not that we want to sort of promote. So I get what you're saying. At this moment, I think it's written in a way that would allow us to do what we're talking about, but I want it to be clear what the intent is. So let me take a look at the word supplemental or an alternative.
Yeah, as I said, I'm just telling you, I just don't want to get in this situation where the wage part of this is being used to, as kind of like a filler for other things, right? We want to make sure that the expenses that are paid out of this are related specifically to the purpose for which it's formed.
But it's the reason the ambulance fund, was sort of one of the things I was thinking about, and just sort of proactively, letting the finance committee know what is being spent out of this account and for what.
Yeah, and to that point, Dan, one of the other things, Travis, again, you will let you come up with a proposal, but you could, the other requirement could be that you could say finance committee notification of any expense greater than X, and quarterly reporting to the finance committee or something like that. I think that would probably meet what Dan's saying, but I'll let you, you can go off and.
That would work.
That's all I have to say about this. It's not that big a deal. I just want to make sure it doesn't build up too high, and that we also don't start pushing costs that should be in the general fund into this revolving fund. That's all.
Gotcha. Third on this list.
And I will say one thing before you get into this, Travis. Do you want to have these articles written this way, or do you want to amend the bylaw and put them in the bylaw? Because this will require us to approve them every year.
Yeah, no, I think that, the idea would be the way that this is currently doing it would add these in May 2022 to the list of revolving funds that need the cap approved each year.
Okay, I mean, again, that's up to you, but I just want to make sure, because we did have, at one point we had to vote a bylaw. There's the piece of voting the caps every year, but we did have to start this process, vote to amend, create basically the bylaw that says all these revolving funds with these limits, right? So I'm just saying that the wording, you may want to revisit the wording to make sure that we're specifying that this is going to be added to our bylaw chapter, whatever, to the list of revolving funds specified in whatever it is in the bylaws.
That is certainly my intention, so I will double check it. But the intent would be that these get added to the list and the limits get set every year. So through year one, we would come back, look at a lot of what we just discussed as it relates to the recycling center one, and determine if that cap should be increased, decreased. Same thing for this one. The difference between the one that we just discussed and this one is this is more of a the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come scenario, where I believe, it's a matter of time until we've selected the EV charging. We've looked at grants that are available at the moment. Some of them are public, some of them are private, right? Eversource through DPU is kind of forced to go through some grant programs. Not to say that they aren't doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, but they're being forced by DPU. And but then there's the ones from the state. And so there are a few areas throughout town that we've discussed. 9 Green is probably a longer term scenario. More, another lot that we own as a public lot is the one behind the central fire station. We've looked at that one. When grant applications go in, there's going to be a number of opportunities, But the difference between the last EV charging grant that the town received through Green Communities behind Town Hall is that at that point, it was expressly not allowed for us to collect credit card receipts from somebody who came in plugged in. The newest grant opportunities are allowing that. One of the questions that came up is who the third-party administrator of the credit card collection would be. It's a company that has sort of cornered the market called Charge Points. Chris Mayo has looked at a lot of those through the Green Communities and the other opportunities, and we've sat down and had initial discussions with the sustainability coordinator. So the reason, again, when I say if you build it, they will come, is that we're setting this up with the idea that if any point we are going to go down that path and we'll set up, well, let's say it's 2 stations or 10 stations in a public parking lot, we would want to collect receipts, and we'd want those to go somewhere directly that would then support the use of that and maintenance of that system, right? And so the initial money going into the revolving fund would most likely be the grant funding specifically to make the purchase. Some of those funds are set up where they pay directly for the equipment, but either way, we're protected so that this doesn't have to run through the general fund. And then what the town is going to have to do in that instance is determine what rate we would charge somebody plugging in, right? Assuming at the moment we have 0 EV vehicles in our own town fleet. So this would not be to charge our own vehicles. It would be available to the public to come and charge, pay for a credit card based on kilowatt hours. So what I've seen in a number of communities in our area is either, setting a rate that is trying to encourage people to charge their cars and buy EV and have it accessible. So they're essentially, they're trying to supplement it. They're trying to keep the rate low to encourage. Others are setting a rate where they're capturing all of their costs, including the depreciation of the asset, so that at the end of the useful life of the EV charging station, you're in position to buy the new equipment. You don't have to decide, look, now the town wants all of this in our public parking lot, and we want to replace the equipment because it's at the end of its useful life. The revolving fund would then be set up through the rate that would then, acquire, would build the balance to replace the asset over time, most likely 5 to 10 years. So, that all of those things would be determined, but setting up the fund as we go for the grant opportunity, in my opinion, is the best way to go about this. Because if we were to get in a situation where we got the EV charging stations and we didn't have a place to operate or to have the funds flow through, it would probably hinder our ability to seriously engage with some of these grant opportunities. The end.
Any questions on this one? Okay, Mr. Whitaker? Or did you?
So is there a way to, I know you said you're going to look at it, but is there a way to, I don't know, codify is too strong a word, but to codify that this has to recoup expenses? And the reason why I ask that is I'm all for electric vehicles. I think it's a great thing, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem that I have with it is that if I'm a regular Joe who can't afford an electric car yet, why is my tax dollars now going to pay for effectively, actually, I don't, Dan, you own it. Sorry, I don't mean to pick on you, Dan, but I think you own an electric car. Why is my tax dollars going to pay for Dan's car?
Because you appreciate me and feel good when you help me.
And I will say that was exactly what I said to Travis earlier today when I said this cannot be seen as as subsidizing any resident's energy use, right? They're charging it.
It's a plug-in hybrid, so it's barely a hybrid. So
okay,
but that is a good point, right? We don't go around paying people for their subsidizing people's gasoline. So we should make sure that we're charging. It should not cost the taxpayers any money to have these charging stations.
I think the majority of people in this space would be insulted of the comparison of EV charging stations to that for gas. But I understand the point, and I think the way that I explained it earlier to the chair, and my intention would be that this, the rate be set right. We want it to be, we don't want it to be outlandish. And as I said, there are some where you can clearly see that what their intention is to subsidize because the rate is lower than obviously what the town is going to have to pay for the electricity. But the rates that I've seen that are probably more in line with what we're talking about not only recoup the cost of the electricity, which is essentially the base rate, but then there's an additional amount to capture the depreciation of the asset. So that would be my intention here. I would say, actually, to that point, I'm wondering if in other requirements, and again, I'll have to check with council, but if other requirements specified that, the rate would be set at a minimum at what the cost of electricity. I think that answers Mark's question. And quite honestly, building in the depreciation of the asset is something that I would like to see, but is not a policy decision that has been made yet. So I think I don't want to overstate it and put it in this, but I think stating the fact that the town will recoup at least the cost of the electricity, I think is something that would be wise to put in other requirements here if council agrees.
Thank you, Travis.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Now just out of curiosity, Travis, where did the 100,000 limit come from on this one?
So my issue right now, and actually I have to look at it, and Chris Mayo, if you want to weigh in or just to let me know, but my issue in the first year is going to be if it were a grant fund where the dollars for the grant come in and go through the revolving fund and don't specifically buy the equipment, I need to have it in year one with the ability to buy the equipment. And so I'm wondering too, if, I can kind of separate that so that clearly the spending limit is based simply on our ability to run the program from a staffing standpoint or any other costs that we incur. And that any dollars related to specifically the capital purchase would be separate from that limit. I don't honestly know. That's another one that, if I separate it entirely, that's probably the cleanest way to do it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, there's a part of me that says, why even bother putting the grant funding in there in the first place? If you write a grant and you get the grant, right? And let's say it's a grant for putting in EV stations, right? Just take the grant, build the stations. Then the maintenance costs and the depreciation costs would come out of this fund via the use of the station, right? So I'm just saying you might want to save yourself the headache of saying a grant would just come in, go into this fund, and then be spent from the fund, because the grants are usually earmarked for specific purposes anyway.
We could probably keep the grant funding in the special revenue category.
Yeah, and the other question is, it was of course the same question I asked before, which is, what are the wages you anticipate from this? Because it says cost, wages, and expenses.
Yeah, no, so that'll be the same scenario. It's kind of in an instance where we're talking about indirect costs in the future, right? If this is costing us our staff time in any way, those types of things are generally how towns are addressing their revolving funds for something like this, where we're not adding staff to support this model. At the end of the day, though, I don't have anything in mind in terms of actually charging anybody's wages to this at the moment. It's really the way that these are sort of written to allow us flexibility.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I was just trying to think of what would, in terms of, again, from the I could see you get a grant, you put one of these things in, but do we even have staff capable, so to speak? We don't have experts in EV charging stations to maintain them. So I would think that would be a contracted service to maintain them, in which case, as I said, there would be no wage requirement because it would be a professional service. So anyway, just something to think about.
All right. So that is the group of, is there any other questions on 23 through 25?
I don't see any, so go ahead, move on to the next batch.
All right. Screen sharing stopped as the window is closed. That's true. I did close that window. All right. This is the next batch, and these are 30 through 34. I discussed at length 31 through 34 yesterday with the capital subcommittee. So I'll just take this as you'd like to the chair. I think we've had some discussions on the easement. I can certainly answer any questions if you want to go that way.
Well, the first question I have is this, I mean, this is not related to the article itself as much as the financial part of it. Are we going to write the motion to basically say that it's 51,000 from Article 5 of the STM of December 5?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make it clear that this is not new 51,000. This is 51,000 of the 150 we approved in December.
Yeah, And so where I say other down there, that's how when I build a certificate of appropriations for the whole warrant, that's what I put in the column of other. But you're right. What it will need to say in the motion is specifically the article, which we discussed, I believe, last week, the article balances that we have. That would be the article from December. That was if we had been the most expensive septic option out back with pumping. So by doing this, by redirecting 51,000 of that original appropriation to this easement, we're left with just under $100,000 for a project, which we estimate in the $75,000 to $85,000 range. So, and then again, I mean, the long-term benefits of this system design with gravity, without pumping, without the need to be maintaining pumps over 20 plus years is much better for the town in the long run, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'll just point out two quick things and I'll get to you then. You're missing a parentheses, a closing paren after Church of Christ. Okay, and what I would say is take away the to raise and appropriate, just say, and to transfer from available funds, because you're not going to raise and appropriate any of this, right? So, right, and then the motion would be to transfer from Article 5 of STM, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, Vin?
Yes, my question, where exactly is this going? Just trying to picture in my mind's eye.
So the actual design of the system, all of the physical equipment will be on town property. It'll be on if you're looking at Town Hall, on the left side of the building is where the tanks will be. As we all are aware, that, septic systems do require a certain amount of space to be sited. That the leaching field area will extend into what is the corner of the green space in front of the church. So right now there's a large tree that appears to be either dead or dying. That will need to be removed. Otherwise, there should be no other disturbances. And part of our agreement as well would be that we'll replace a tree of a certain diameter elsewhere on the property, but it can't go back in that same spot.
Oh, it's towards the front.
Yes. So if you're looking at Town Hall, then the driveway sort of splits as you enter. That green space directly to the left, if you're looking at Town Hall, I suppose, is really the corner. And it's, as you can see, the square footage in this agreement. And so, right, all of the major equipment, so to speak, the tanks are on our property, but this would be, the square footage we're needed to have to meet all the requirements of a septic system for our size. And then one last thing, I think had been probably previously discussed, a point that was brought up by Michelle. We're sizing this for the idea that, we have an event hall upstairs, right? I mean, that's a major component of this. And another reason why square footage was really a main concern here, and why, having the church agree to allow us some of this space is going to work. At the end of the day, that is going to be green space, right? We're going to, once this project is done, return that to green space. It'll just be under, it'll be an easement that we have.
It'll be well fertilized green space. So, okay, you all set, Ben?
I am, thank you.
Okay, Mark?
I know it's a procedural question. Why do we need a vote to do this? It just seems like it should have just been part of what we did in December. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why we need this.
So in December, we had not come to an agreement as it relates to the easement itself. So the easement needs to be approved by town meeting. It also needs to be, there needs to be an agreement in place unless we're doing a property taking or going through sort of the ways in which towns can acquire space if you're not under agreement. This is, I think people are aware, we're not allowing people in Upper Town Hall. That's where we are with our current septic system. It is, to say it's beyond its useful life, is understating it. And so, there has been the possibility that we were not going to be really able to make it to this town meeting without needing to go forward with the most expensive option, which was the pumping option out back. At this point, we did reach a point where, we felt like we could maintain, and we continued to have discussions with the church, and then came to an agreement. And so it is still requiring that we have this on the town meeting, that the two things need to be approved is the dollar amount, but also the easement itself. And so, what we got approved in December was a project to replace the septic system. We had multiple designed by Paul Saulnier. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's done a significant amount of work for us, which I appreciate. And so we were aware of the cost to go out back. We were aware of the cost. We had looked at other options to maintain directly on our property that did not require pumping, none of which were going to work for the square footage reasons. And then this was always the one from a gravity system perspective, which we felt like was the best option, but we needed to come to an agreement with the church, and we did. But we were unable to do that before the December town meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay, keep going, Travis.
Okay. Blair Square Design Engineering, discussed a little bit yesterday. Again, they, and I think I corrected this now. The missing street here is boxed in by these three streets plus Winthrop Street is quote unquote the Blair Square area. There's a Blair Square committee that has had some funds donated to them and had Beals and Thomas create a rendering, which I can provide and we can make as a supplemental document here. And this would be essentially to move to the next stage, which is creating construction documents. They had been through the CPC. They had sort of gone with the beginning of their rendering. The CPC said, this is something in our wheelhouse, certainly, but we're not going to, we'd like the town to commit to the construction documents, make sure that the town is interested in this before we are willing to commit to the dollars of the project. The original iteration of this, I think, we discussed a little bit yesterday, included bathrooms, it included, parking and a number of other items. It has been scaled down substantially in the rendering, which, I can provide to everybody, or you guys could ask Kevin Conley of the Blair Square Committee to come on your meeting next week, is much more simple, right? It is going to require construction to make, their vision come true. And so the construction documents will be important, but it is no longer sort of septic systems and all those types of things that would make this project really sizable for the CPC to consider. And at this point, I think the $45,000 for the design engineering is going to get us what we need. I would be the one at this point, sort of taking over the directing of the design engineering, simply because we're now talking, we're talking about dollars that are in the procurement space that is under the town administrator's office, but obviously with great input again from the Blair Square Committee. And then their intention would be to take those construction documents, go back to Frank Chamberlain's group of the CPC towards the October town meeting, and pitch the full project, at which point that would be their primary funding source. And that's sort of where it is.
And by the way, it's Exchange Street. It's the 4th Street.
All right, I have Winthrop in my other, but
Winthrop's next to Front. So the based on those three you have there, Exchange Street wants to be the 4th one.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions on this one?
Just exchange Winthrop for Exchange.
Boom, boom.
Okay.
So.
All right, scrolling.
Yep.
All right, demo of the structure at 9 Green Street, again, discussed yesterday, but one of the components here that I've added in is quite a bit of the information I think was really generally the capital subcommittee's questions, which was, do we need to demo this building, and what is the option for not sort of going ahead with what would be the recommendation of the 9 Green Street Committee, which is to turn this into a parking lot to support local business in that area, and the parking needs of our own public places such as Goodwill Park and supplemental parking available to the library across the street. And so the answer to that was sort of when this property was taken, we've been through a number of things with the licensed site professional, which was Lord Engineering. And they did look at a number of things to keep us in compliance with DEP. That the work that was concluded sort of indicated that the existing structure is not feasible due to contamination and thereby significantly limits the ability to resell the property for private development. I would say, again, there's going to be public conversations that come before this sort of progresses towards it potentially being a public parking lot. That's just the reality of where this needs to go. But at the same point, none of those conversations really impact the idea that the building needs to come down. It needs to be made safe, and we need to get this in compliance with DEP. The contaminants need to be sort of locked and stopped from migrating and tracked. And then at that point, what was approved in December was the design first of the demo plan, which is what you see here. Second would be the plan related to future stormwater on the system on the site. It is an interesting sort of grade of the site. It goes down as you get back towards the back of the Superette parking lot. And then the third one would be a full design of if the town were to commit to a public parking lot. So that's what we have engaged PAR for. The first step in that, and the deliverable that they had in their contract prior to this town meeting, was to get us the demo plan in concert with the information that we had previously received from Lord Engineering and related to the compliance issues with DEP for the site.
Okay. Any questions on this? One thing I would, not related to this particular article directly, but at some point in the future, I'd love to know exactly how much money we ended up, when all this is done with 9 Green Street, to know how much money we spent from start to finish on 9 Green Street. So, I mean, not, as I said, not really related to this article in particular, but we've had all these different costs over the years. It would be nice to see what the total cost was for taking that property.
So when you say, I mean, I can pull what we've paid to Lord. I mean, that's been in the last, let's say.
Oh, we're gonna have more expenses, right? So
no, absolutely. I just didn't know
right.
if there was costs you were referring to before that problem.
No. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, I think it would be educational to look at, when we're done with whatever we're doing with this property, right? That it started out as, we're going to take this and flip it and put it back on the tax rolls, and then it's going to end up costing us, some several $100,000, I'm guessing, by the time it becomes a parking lot. And there may be other things, EV stations or whatever, but, and again, I'm not arguing against the parking lot use. I'm just saying that it's one of those things where it was perceived as a way to return it to the tax rolls, and it's going to end up costing us several $100,000 and not returning it to the tax rolls. So I think that's important to look at the end of the day, to say how did this project turn out relative to its original statement of intent. Then.
Yeah, I want to disagree with you, Ken, because I heard all along it was going to be a parking lot when they talked about it. Nothing about flipping it and having returned to tax rolls. Besides, it was an eyesore. It was just this blighted building that was right next to a park and on a residential street. So it's not helping beautifying our downtown. So I understand what your thought process is, but I honestly don't recall them talking about ever returning it to the tax rolls.
Okay, well, I will, we can take this offline, but I will say that I watched the select board meeting where that was discussed by a prior select board. So the parking lot was always in play in the sense that there were always people that said they wanted it to be a parking lot. So I'm not disputing that aspect of it, but I'm just saying that the known environmental concern was there from the beginning. And as you know, with Axton Cross, we generally do not take properties that have known environmental issues until there's a resolution of the environmental issue, because the liability of the town is like this, where you end up having the town paying to clean it up. So that's why I said I'm not disagreeing with it being a parking lot, but I'm saying that there was a big debate before this property was taken about, are we going to take it, and how do we, we do want to get rid of it. We want something to happen on it, but the whole idea was the select board back then was told that, hey, if you take it, it's really, there are environmental issues, but the building is okay and blah, blah, blah. And you can take it and turn it around. And once you take it for tax, like we did with Andrews School and other properties, right? Take it and try to turn it into a producing asset. So as I said, that's irrelevant to this article. We are where we are.
But there have been very vocal voices about wanting to turn it into a parking lot that I think drowned out all the other discussion that had happened earlier.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm not disputing that the parking lot may be the best use for it, but I think it's important to understand that how much money we spent making it a parking lot and how much we're going to be giving up. It's not much. I think Travis told me
charge
like
$10 an
$7,000 a
hour.
year.
We'll charge $10 an hour for parking and we'll recoup it real quick.
Well, I'm just saying it's not like it was much in terms of taxes. I think it was only like $7,000 a year, but that's an ongoing revenue. You've taken it off the tax rolls. So anyway, does anybody have questions about this particular article?
My intention is to have much more public comment. To Dan's point of, I think everybody, if this is going to be a parking lot, right now, what this building needs to be is no longer a building. It is not going to be a building in the private sector the way it is currently constructed, and we know that. So, the building needs to come down. We don't want teenagers climbing in through the roof anymore and those types of things. And we need it to be secured and safe. And what PAR is going to put together is going to be something that the community can look at and then have the ability to vote on in the future. And that's my intent. But I think to Ken's point and what we discussed, all of those financial numbers need to be part of the conversation, and they certainly will be. So I'll go to the last one on this list. Nope, I have two on this list. So I'll go to the second and last one on this list, which is the feasibility study for the DPW facility. I went through this pitch yesterday for the capital subcommittee, but I know there are differing opinions on this group. So I'll go through my spiel again. At this point, the feasibility study to me is we don't want to lose any more time. At the end of the day, a feasibility study is not going to mean that anything is being built next year, probably the year after that. We are far away from a DPW construction project, which is a problem because of the current condition of the two facilities we have. So for anybody who's unfamiliar, we have the Central Street location, which houses our water department. We have the Arch Street location, which houses our highway department. Both buildings are, again, useful life is kind of a pointless term in this. They're very, very bad. We could provide you, the assessments that the facilities manager has done and the information that we have from Dude Solutions, but that's just, it's really, you could take a look at it. Nobody's going to object to that. We don't want to put a lot of money into it. We need to maintain it for the variety of reasons of keeping operations going. The shed may be an issue before we're able to sort of come to an agreement on where or what a DPW facility will look like in the future. We're going to have those types of conversations, unfortunately, probably before we get to this. But what we really need to do is have a feasibility study that looks at the options and is going to provide us with at least a direction to go in. And then the next step before anything ever, any shovel ever hits the ground is going to be design engineering of that. But there's so many questions that need to be answered before we get to design engineering, namely the location. So right now we have the two different locations, Arch and Central. At the end of the day, maybe one of those two locations would be a combined facility. Maybe we need to do substantial rehab on both of those facilities. I doubt that based on the condition that I've seen, but it might be possible that a feasibility study would come back with that information. At the end of the day, if we move this to one of our current locations, there's another component, which is going to be decommissioning one of the sites that we currently use, which has been storing, either chemicals or salt type, those types of products. So there's those complications that, again, a feasibility study needs to weigh and bring to us as a town to sort of decide which direction we want to go. I would say, a feasibility study is in the 9-month range. Eventual, sort of design engineering is going to be in the 9-month range. We're talking multiple years before we have a project that could be brought to the town for a borrowing authorization. And I really don't think we want to lose any time on this. So that's really it, I think, at this point. And then from the reason, in the conversations I had with the capital subcommittee yesterday is right now, when I look at a 5-year capital plan, I have out there a number of $15 million for a DPW facility. That's based on, very limited information that I have. I can then backtrack, say design engineering cost of that would be 10% of 15 million, which is 1.5. And I can build, future spending projections, debt projections based on that, but it's really a number that isn't based on anything because I don't know what a future DPW facility looks like. So answering these questions, I think for a variety of reasons, capital planning being one of them, is going to be really important. And I think May is the time to do it. The end.
Okay, Dan?
Okay, so I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a second here. because in October 2019, and I know, Travis, this was before you joined, the select board came to us with 3 different studies that they wanted. A water replacement study, a sidewalk study, and a DPW study. And the finance committee, because at that time the plans and sort of idea behind it was not fully formed, recommended to town meeting. The town meeting not fund any of them, and town meeting agreed. We then have come back, and the select board and you did an exquisite job, by the way. Came up with plans and prioritized the water and the sidewalks. Now, after listening to some of the select board meetings and listening to you, it's become clear that probably the most dire situation, the most need for a study was actually this DPW facility. And so it's very frustrating because now we're in this position where we asked for prioritization. The select board chose the other 2 items for prioritization. And now we're coming back to do this, and essentially are getting the 3 prioritized, which we know that we're not going to be able to fund all 3 of them. And so, my feeling is this is actually probably the one that should have been done in December, or maybe one other one, but this should have been, this was the most certainly dire. Certainly, if you listen to the chair of the select board, who claims to not want to put another dime into these facilities, despite the fact that they have holes and a retaining wall that might fall over at any moment. This is the one that should have been done, and it's very frustrating. So I'm going to support this because, again, I don't want to see town to have us working in unsafe and sort of in poor conditions. But one thing I would like to understand a little bit more of is what an estimate of the cost that you think that we're going to put into this building over the next 4 years, let's just say, before we actually get the final, because it's going to take a year to build the building probably once you get everything done. So, we're definitely looking at 3 to 5 years, let's just say, and until we have this facility. And if you truly have holes in the roof and, a shed is problematic, and, retaining wall or something that is iffy. I mean, I think that we're probably going to end up putting money into these facilities while we wait to get the final facility done. And look, we've done that before. Not that I know the chief was on the call, not to pick on him, but we put a ton of money into a fire engine one year, knowing that fire engine was about to be replaced because it was going to take a year to build the new fire engine, and you just had to do it. So
yeah,
sometimes
if I could just one
Yep.
one thing on the initial point. As it relates to the 3 studies and the history behind that. I understand where the finance committee and the select board are with the history of those articles, and I don't really feel, I'm not going to get into that. But what
I wasn't asking you to, that was just my soapbox.
No, I understand. So I'll say the point that I made. I think most people, including yourself, sort of agreed in generally why those were supported in December. Was that I don't see these 3 articles as all that similar. I see the sidewalk article, as I said, is to me presenting us with a lot of grant opportunities that is going to be my focus particularly. I think, while there was discussion on, the borrowing for a lot of sidewalk projects and those things that may have been part of the original conversation, that's not where I am with that. And that information that I'm waiting on, I think is going to be very helpful for us to get to take advantage of a lot of opportunities right now through Mass DOT and others. As it relates to water, I never connect water infrastructure, pipes in the ground with these other things, because quite frankly, it's an enterprise fund that needs to support itself and needs to provide the water service to the community. And that's the way that all towns are set up, not just Holliston. And so I get what you're saying, that there were 3 studies at the time, and there's all this history behind it. I get that. But I don't see them as all that similar, quite frankly, other than the word study.
Well, with water, I guess with water, we're putting tons of money into water, right? I mean, we've got the $300 infrastructure fee. We're doing a mile a year or so. We're building an $8 million water treatment plant, that is hopeful. Like, part of me sort of is like, well, we should have just waited to see how those things went before we further studied pipes that had already been studied and were in the ground. And I understand that this probably adds a little value to it to some degree, but we've thrown a lot of money at it. But last year, the select board said, this is our priority. And so I said, okay. Had the select board come back and said, the DPW is falling apart, I don't think that I would have supported, as much as I did, although I'm not actually sure I supported the sidewalk study anyway. But look, I get the point, but there's still spending behind all of these articles, right? Whether it's grants, and I'm not sure that while I appreciate your position, I'm not sure that that's shared by everybody that is in the decision-making chain. So I'm not, convinced, and not because I think that you're not telling me what you believe. I'm just not convinced that there won't be a push to spend significant money on sidewalks and related things from that study. So that's my point, is that I think that, I still think that we're spending a lot of money on studies for the fact that there has been no, and this, and Mary's on the call, this ties beautifully in with what Mary is trying to sort of start to some degree. We don't really have a vision for the town. We don't know what the town sort of wants. So we're throwing a whole bunch of money at studies that, may or may not actually end up being used in any kind of significant manner. I mean, the sidewalk certainly sounds like you're going to use it for grants. That's great. I'm not sure about the water. And so, as I said, though, what's done is done. We're now dealing with what we have here. So, I'm going to support this, but I'm frustrated. And the other thing is this, I think I meant to mention that I would like some idea of what may need to be spent on this facility over the next few years, because I don't believe that we will be able to get away with $0 in the facility if it's actually in as bad a condition.
No, actually, because one of the things I think is going to go into it, I think James Keast, just looking, is not on this evening, although, I could ask him to sort of put on paper and just send to you by email the work that's been done in terms of looking at those facilities, looking at over time, how much we have spent, and what we've got out of Dude Solutions, which I think would be a good case, test case, to sort of show you what is capable out of Dude Solutions. So I'll have James follow up with the group on that, because that is information that we've started to call.
Okay, so you do think that there will be money that will need to be put into the facilities before we get a new one?
Yeah, I mean, what the issue is probably going to be whether it's capital dollars or maintenance dollars, right? I mean, that's always one of the conversations that goes into the capital discussion, is if we don't invest in capital, then over time it ends up as maintenance dollars. So that's
why we need to continue to put money aside into the capital set aside.
That's an excellent point. We'll talk about that next.
Hey, Vin?
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it because Dan's agreeing to do it. I just want to say from a liaison standpoint, the reason why I was in favor of doing it, as Travis mentioned, there's two different studies. The water is totally separate, and they needed to have some sort of idea based on the study. The last one was done 10 years ago, if I remember correctly, so they needed an updated. It's not like it's a whole thing. The sidewalks totally ancillary, and if we put any grants or anything on it, that's wonderful. I would be totally in favor of that rather than spending money, with the exception of putting sidewalks in front of my house, but that's another story entirely. But we all in agreement that we need to do something with those two buildings. The highway department's horrible, and the water department, well, I don't even want to mention it. It's just, yeah, we've been Band-Aid, and it needs to be up to better than what it is. So that's my reasoning of saying, yeah, we needed to have it, and why I would have agreed, and as a liaison for the DPW. So.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? Anybody need any more info from Travis on this one?
I'll have James send out those reports.
Yeah, I thought I saw him earlier, but maybe it's a ghost of meetings past.
Okay, next.
Okay, this one, I believe, you had a conversation earlier with a member of the TAC, so I don't know if there's specific questions on this one. And Tina's also on the call as a member of TAC, so I would simply say the revenue source for this, when I say other, it was a conversation we had last week which is related to a previous article, which would be in the motion specifically, which was preemption, traffic equipment. I think the way that article is described, you could probably make the case that these things could be charged there right now. I think personally it's cleaner to do it, put it as an article, make sure that, it's all very clear what the money's going to. And these are, TAC is a group, just so everybody remembers, is a group that is chaired by the police chief, the fire chief, the DPW director, are on it, as well as, I believe, 4 residents. So they've been hearing from residents. They've been doing a public hearing process on those items. And there are some costs associated with some of them. The largest cost included in this request is related to sort of the flashing equipment for a crosswalk at Woodland. And then I would sort of rely on Tina to add any further context to that if I did not hit it properly.
Okay. Tim?
Travis, I'm just a little confused. So is this different than the crosswalks over on Prentice Street by the golf course?
So it's similar equipment. The reason I put, and I sent this out yesterday, James pointed it out, and then I didn't discuss it with you. I put a quote for the one at Prentice to show the equipment. That's why I added the quote that was in the packet for the Capitol that I sent to the subcommittee. It's a similar idea to that sign at Prentice across from the golf course, but this one would be, my understanding is Woodland is the TAC vote that was taken, I think, at the end of February. That is the genesis of this. So the TAC took a vote to request the equipment, and then that goes through the select board, and then for the dollars goes from the select board onto the town meeting warrant.
Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Dan?
Is that why you mentioned Prentice? Because I had included that in the pack. Okay. Yeah. So that was the most, that's what I'm basing a lot of the dollars amount on. This 21,000 number specifically is the article balance. I believe the police chief told me earlier that the number may be in the 18,500 range. But I will adjust that when I get that final number. But it is based on the request that they made in February. So I will adjust that accordingly. The 21,008 is the balance of that previous article.
So is this a crosswalk at the intersection of Church and Woodland, getting them over from Church over to Woodland?
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because Church and Elm don't intersect Woodland.
There's Tina. She's got the answer.
So, okay. So Tina, you want to tell us where these crosswalks are?
Yeah, sure. So you're only looking at one request for a rapid rectangular flashing beacon, which is at the existing crosswalk down by Holliston Oil.
Well, so this has nothing to do with Elm and Church then?
Hold on, I'm looking at the language. I think the language here probably needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Yep, no, we're talking about the one down at Woodland Street by the schools.
Okay. I mean, Church, that intersection is also a very dangerous intersection. I just wanted to clarify and understand.
Fair enough. There are 3 pieces to this request. One is the beacon, the pedestrian signal at the existing crosswalk by Holliston Oil. The second is for the LED lit 4-way stop signs. That's Church and Elm Street. Church and Railroad, right there by the Depot liquor store, right there by the rail trail crossing. The third is for a entering school zone sign that would be on Elm Street, because this is a request that came directly actually from the principal of the Miller School. When you come down Elm Street and you turn left, you are entering at that point into the school zone, so cars don't realize that. And the observation is that they're not slowing down going to 20 miles an hour, because that school zone sign is to the right of that intersection, if you're following my geography here.
I'm following it.
So as cars are flying down Elm Street to cut through down Woodland, they're turning into a school zone without knowing that they're in a school zone, because the signal for the school zone is to the right of that.
Why don't we just move the signal for the school zone down the street?
Because, I've actually got that feedback from the DPW already, and my request was for information to understand where the school zone starts, because you're going to put the school zone, school safety zone sign with the 20 miles an hour at the start of the school zone. You're not going to move it in. You're going to put it right where it starts. So it's my understanding that where it is where it starts. So to move it over to the left of Elm Street is to lose some of that school safety zone.
So okay.
As somebody who drives down Woodland on a pretty regular basis, I live over in Norfolk, I do understand visually as a driver, it's a little confusing until you pass the Woodland split that you're right next to a school. But
Yeah,
I understand why that signing will be important. Okay, thank you.
sure.
So Travis, is the quote that we looked at Capitol yesterday just a baseline to understand this, or is that a separate request? Are there two requests or one?
The Prentice was done, and so I used that quote as a basis to show the cost of this Woodland one because they're very similar.
Okay.
The only difference, and I think TAC, could clear up if that's needed. I think there's two different ones. One that's slightly more expensive is motion activated as you approach it. And there's been question, I think, of whether or not that's the type that you'd want, or if it's sort of you hit the button. That's the only difference. But the quote that I added there was for the one at Prentice, which did not have the motion activated, I believe.
Okay. Dan?
So, is there any real sort of process and planning that is going into TAC and their requests? Because frankly, I mean, these things seem to be sort of all over the place. I'm also kind of curious about whether the school committee as a whole has actually weighed in on this, because again, it does seem like it's basically for the schools. And I realize that there's a school representative on TAC, but again, that is a school representative and not necessarily
Thank you.
representative of the town as a whole. This seems just like a phenomenal amount of money for what should be kind of some aluminum. And I realize that there's this flashing light, but yeah, I don't know. I just, we're putting up all these signs all over the place, and it doesn't seem like there's really any kind of real strategy to it, any kind of planning to it. And it's just request after request after request after request. And almost feels like we've come up with a way of searching for solutions to problems we didn't know existed. I don't know. I drive my kids to school, and there are definitely kids that drive or walk across that crosswalk. But everyone in the morning and in the afternoon seems pretty aware of it. So maybe also the chief, who I saw is on now, could talk about just his experience with any incidents in this area, or not specific incidents, but just sort of his sort of insights into whether there are incidents or not.
Well, Tina has her hand up, so I don't know if you want to respond, Tina. Is that why you raised your hand?
Well, actually, a couple of things. I just want to back up to the motion sensor piece. The 18,000 that is, I think, in the packet that you have for the pedestrian signal, that is with the motion sensor in it. That's actually what's up currently at the Pinecrest Golf Course crosswalks. So yes, motion censored is what's being requested at this point in time. And feedback we've received through Safe Routes to School is that that's the right thing to do, but we can talk about that another time. As for the strategy and the way in which these requests are coming, it's Dan, I guess I'd suggest joining a TAC meeting to see how the process works, because there's a process in place. And in terms of, are there safety concerns? It's a new crosswalk, so I'm not sure we're waiting for something to happen. I think that the history there goes back to a year old now. So we're not going to wait until there's an incident to decide that we need to put in a public safety sign.
Well, there aren't flashing lights at every crosswalk in the world, so clearly there's.
I actually don't think that's true at all. But
it absolutely is true that there are not flashing lights at every single crosswalk.
Oh, there are not. I'm sorry. I thought you were saying there are. No, I agree with you. I think that's an issue. But anyway, you're correct.
Well, I mean,
the one.
It's almost like we're going to have so many flashing lights. We're going to be Vegas or Times Square pretty soon. So I don't know. I mean, it's just so. Anyway, I was wondering if the chief could talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
and attending TAC, I mean, from my understanding of the process is people request signs and tell you problems, and then you come up with solutions. So again, as I'm saying, we're seeking problems to find solutions. So, Chief Cassidy, are you still there, willing to?
Yeah, thank you, Chief Cassidy. I'm not prepared to present any specific data related to Woodland Street or that stretch of road, but I would note that it's not the role of TAC to come up with the solutions that are presented. Part of the way the hearing process works is when a petitioner comes to us with something that they believe to be a problem, we ask them for possible solutions, and we weigh the solutions that they propose. And we don't always approve all of the options that they come to us. We sometimes say no, and we don't always bring to the board requests for funding or signage or other things. So I would dispute the characterization that this is a newly formed committee that just seeks to spend money.
Okay, fair enough. I guess it's a little weird to me that residents bringing problems to people should also bring the solutions. I guess I would think that there would be better qualified people to come up with solutions, and maybe solutions that are, keep costs in mind when looking for them. I mean, I'm just, if it's a new crosswalk and we're concerned, I mean, there are other things that can be put up. You can put a cone in the middle of the street with, the state law saying, pedestrians must be allowed to cross. I mean, there are a lot of things that are not, $18,000 flashing lights that can be put up that are done in multiple areas. And it seems like we have defaulted. And granted, I do not see all the requests that you turn away, so that I do not have a full picture of the situation. But certainly with the amount of requests that are coming through to town meeting and through us to town meeting, just and the comments that have been I've heard made about how we may need to do different lights like this at different places, every year. I don't know. It feels to me like I'll stop there.
But I would be happy to run a report on that geographic area and give you data as opposed to just anecdotes.
No, sure. Okay. That's great.
Okay. So let's see. I don't know. I guess Vin was next. I saw Tina's hand was up, but I'll get to you. And was up first. So go ahead, Vin.
Yeah, I just have a question. Why? I thought the problem with the automated things, it didn't really work uptown. And so I think it changed and they ended up going with the buttons. I don't see why. I understand why you'd kind of want it, but at the same time, pushing the button, I think is better because it shows it's less things to break from my understanding, and it's old time. It's like, hey, let's push the buttons. And I'm guessing if I was a betting man, it's probably cheaper. So while I don't want to suggest, how to do your job, but I would say, go back to the old fashioned things of pushing the button for those lights. That's it.
Okay. Tina?
Yeah, so just two comments. I mean, in terms of the pedestrian signal down on Woodland Street, which again is what this article is about, there is debate for sure that could be had on motion censored versus push button. We are relying on information from Safe Routes to School, which is a national program. It's a program operated and supported by Mass DOT. It's used in, hundreds of towns. Well, I say hundreds, over 100 towns in the state of Massachusetts. And so this is the guidance that comes from Safe Routes to School. Again, we could go back and forth on, is it more likely to fail? Is it more complicated technology? But the reality is, these are children who are crossing, and awareness and safety awareness and attention to the task in front of them is not always their strength. So if it feels like it's overkill, if it feels like it's a heavy use of technology, I think we have to look at who it's serving. And these are individuals who would benefit from that. But again, there could be more debate and discussion on that. Safe Routes to School recommends the motion censored one. In terms of how TAC is functioning and why we're taking suggestions from residents, it's a heed to the call to, don't recreate the wheel when it comes to new committees, and look around at other communities and how do they do this. This is how TAC works in other communities. This is a process that, of the 8 communities that I surveyed when we were drafting the TAC charge, and the calls that I was on with police officers from those TAC in other communities and town planners and the like, this is how they operate. So if it feels weird, I think it's because it's new. It's certainly a format that's used in many other communities who have traffic advisory committees. So I'm comfortable with the way it works. I think we are demonstrating a very good process. It is a new process and there are certainly kinks to be worked out, but I think that the way in which it operates is a very solid process.
Okay. Chief Cassidy.
Thank you, Chief Cassidy. To Vin's question about push button versus motion activated, having seen multiple installations around town, I can tell you that I can make a pitch for and against both. The motion activated ones that are proximate to my street, Burnap at Prentice, frequently are on when no one is trying to cross. The one further down, closer to Highland Street, where there is a push button, I frequently see golfers who step right out into the crosswalk, never pressing the button, and sort of staring at traffic, wondering, why are you looking at us, and just came to a screeching halt. So it's a behavioral issue. Is it advantageous to make sure that when a child approaches a crosswalk in a school zone where this auxiliary warning device is available, that automatically traffic will be notified independent of a child needing to press the button? Yeah, I think that's advantageous. At the same time, I would love to condition those children to grow up to be adults who push the button, because it's frustrating when people just jump right out and expect you to come to a screeching halt. So I could make an argument either way, but if Tina is saying that the best practices from these national organizations is in a school zone, that it should be motion activated, I think we need to provide some weight there.
My kids are great at pushing my buttons.
Not just your kids, Dan.
Definitely not.
Okay. So that's it on the warrant articles, right, Travis?
That's it on the 2 packages I sent that had the financial components. Obviously, we have other ones, the contribution to CapEx and those types of articles. I think we can sort of discuss in the context of the budget.
Okay. So what do we want to discuss in the context? Do you want to go over the changes you sent out earlier today?
Sure. Let me pull that up. This is the format that I've been. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say for the committee, I will incorporate these changes and send out an updated spreadsheet on our side when we're done.
Okay. So this is the format. I think, let me just sort of agree with one point, which is that my tax supported articles as a total is the way that I view this. I understand it's not the way that everybody does, and I can certainly adjust this to address it. So as I mentioned in the email, there are 3 articles that have financial components that would be incorporated in this 1.85 million, lowering the amount available to go into CapEx of 1.6. The discussion we had yesterday at the Capital Subcommittee was, the difference of the 1.6 that I have in my model and the 2 million that the Finance Committee has discussed. Where do we have to get to make progress? I think certainly, based on the conversations that we're going to have on changes of the budget, not necessarily these ones I'm about to go through, which go in the wrong direction, but other changes that we'll talk about, I think we can get in the direction of what was going into CapEx in years prior to as we were progressing in years prior to COVID. I think we certainly have progress to make, and we can do that. I don't think we could hit 2 million personally, but we'll continue to have those discussions. So the things I'll highlight here, again, in the two models, that's the biggest difference, and that's what's in blue. In yellow is a number that decreased from the prior week of 98,000 because of these three changes, which I put in a larger packet for you all earlier today. The wastewater treatment plant, which I can pull up and look at directly at the budgets, but in this model, I mean, it's just a little bit cleaner. But although I can certainly pull them up if we want to. The wastewater treatment plant, if you'll remember, we got the news right before we presented the wastewater treatment plant budget, James Keese and I, to the select board, that the group who does the maintenance of that facility was executing the 90-day opt-out in their contract. They just said they weren't making enough money on that contract, right? I mean, everybody, they need to make money. We get that. Very professional. They went about it the right way. They lived up to the contract. We did ask them for the number. What would it take to make it, financially feasible for you? And they gave us a quote, and we also got quotes from two other companies. At the end of the day, there are other companies who are interested in maintaining those facilities for amounts that did not require us to increase that budget to the level we did as a sort of protection. So we would bring that budget down by a net of $7,000 from as it was presented earlier. That's the good news. The bad news is the liability insurance. I had another conversation with Maya. I would say, just very high level. We had a substantial loss ratio last year. At the time that I got preliminary information from them, I said, give me a conservative number to go with. They said, we always use 8% as a conservative number. I said, okay, I'm going to want to make sure that we refine that number. In refining that number, we went in the wrong direction. 175% loss ratio is something that, is based on our claims in the past year. It is not related to the other sort of things that our liability covers, which is, all of you as members of the Finance Committee, if you were sued personally as your role in the Finance Committee, you'd be protected through this insurance policy. If there were a claim made against the Holliston Police Department, that would be covered under our insurance policy. It is actually our property and liability insurance, specifically within what we pay to Maya, that experienced a significant loss ratio last year that we're seeing as part of this increase. At the end of the day, what this is going to lead us to do is a conversation that I think we discussed when we presented this budget previously anyway. It's going to be looking outside of Maya as we look at FY23. I've already had discussions with their competition. Maya has always been, because of the credits that they offer, for being a good customer over time, for doing a variety of things, for all of the sort of the hoops that we'll jump through from a facility standpoint, from an IT standpoint, that Chris Mayo and James Keese have done a great job of making sure we get all our credits. They're always sort of competitive from that regard. But at some point, when we're looking at the increase that we have here, we know we're going to be looking outside of Maya potentially next year, and it would be very difficult for them to keep our business, most likely for FY23. At the same point, we need this insurance, and this is based on, things that happen that we use insurance for, and it's just the reality of the situation. So this went the other way, and this would be a $30,493 increase over what we had presented previously, and I can get into that budget if we want to look at it. The third one, although I saw Vin's hand go up on that one, which I assume, so if the chair wants me to go through all three or stop there.
Well, I don't think you have to go and dive into it too deeply, put it that way. Well, I'll leave it up to you if you want to go into more detail.
Oh, I just, Vin's hand, so I'll do the third one here. So the third one, again, was a conversation we hit in Capital Subcommittee yesterday. Essentially, the top priority on the replacement of the DPW highway fleet has been the street sweeper. Our street sweeper is in the shop, and when I say the shop, I mean the state of Connecticut, and it may not be coming back. So one thing that we've had to do just to keep up with what we need to do from a street sweeping is not just the beautification of your streets. So you're aware, it's related to our MS4 permit from a stormwater component. There's a number of reasons that we do street sweeping. So we have engaged DPW Highway, Tom Smith and Kellogg and DPW Highway went through the process of making sure that we had that work being done. We engaged a third-party vendor to be doing that at the moment. There's been a little bit of growing pains. At the same point, it's freed up what would normally be a heavy equipment operator elsewhere, and also a substantial amount of maintenance that we do on a regular basis, even when the street sweeper is working well. So where that has put us essentially is to remove a $250,000 piece of equipment from the CapEx or from the capital budget article. Not remove entirely from the capital plan until we get more information, but at least remove it for May, put it on an assumption for October, while we evaluate if we think that a third-party vendor is the right way to go for street sweeping. Again, frees up the staff member at a very critical time of year when we need heavy equipment operators, we're opening parks, we're doing all those types of things. It does reduce sort of maintenance costs, and then it's what is presented here, a $10,000 increase would be to make sure that we have it in the budget to be getting everything we need on an hourly basis through this vendor, but also sort of netting out, which is probably going to be in the $15,000 to $20,000 range over the annualized, but also reflecting the fact that it's going to reduce a couple other costs. So 10,000 is what we've calculated for this year, and then reevaluate as we get towards October to say, is this something we want to really continue as our new operation, or if we want to pursue getting that sweeper back in the fleet. I would mention this because I mentioned last night to the select board. Really, one of the big downsides would be that we don't have our own sweeper in an incident response. Right, an accident on the street, something spills, we can't deploy our own street sweeper. We're reliant on the third-party vendor. But other than that, I think what we'd like to see is I'd like to do the evaluation financially and operationally on if this is the right model for us. So the $10,000 again is put in here. There's a couple other components that didn't sort of get on the agenda last night to vote that I would hope I could get in front of the select board next Monday as it relates to some other items. The 26th police officer is one of the items that I'd like the final vote from the select board on next week, as well as any changes that we may be making for the health insurance budget. But all of those will have to wait till next week. So these changes in the aggregate increased or decreased what was sort of on the bottom line by $33,493. And I have all these budgets were in your packet highlighted in red for the changes.
Okay. Yeah, and I apologize for the confusion. I didn't see Vin's hands up before, so I was wondering why you were stopping. So go ahead, Vin.
Two questions. What kind of claims did we have for property insurance that caused us to have increased dramatically for the property insurance?
I have the loss ratio analysis. I don't want to get too much into some of them, but I mean, for example, fences and parks got knocked down. We always have, the occasional vehicle and those types of things, all of those things within the policy. It was just a year in which we sort of tapped Maya, probably more than usual. But there wasn't anything on there where I would say,
no floods or anything.
No, I mean, not a natural disaster year, certainly. And I'll say too, part of the whole conversation and one that, I would share will be, nobody wants to hear is all of these things that affect the national insurance market when it relates to everything happening in Texas and yada, yada, yada. Just at the end of the day, nobody wants to hear that. If we need to go out to the market and find somebody who's going to produce this for us at a cheaper cost, we're going to do that. And so I understand that that's part of their whole analysis, but it's not something that sways me personally.
No, the other question I have, does the town have cyber insurance? And I ask because I just took out a larger policy for my own organization. So, and with Lawrence and everything, all these different towns getting hacked. So
yes, we do. It's a specific cyber policy. And I guess that would be part of this too, is that there have been changes to the actual envelope. That again is not what's driving this. It's the 175% loss ratio. But there are other components in our policy that have changed over time that have increased costs, cyber insurance being one of them. I can get you the specifics on that insurance policy.
No, I was just curious and just to see that was sufficient. And if the insurance broker, I'm assuming we have, does the auditor ask and are they doing anything about that? And just to see, that's always a concern, especially you read about it in all these different schools getting hostage. That's the last thing we want.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, you all set, Vin?
I am, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle?
Two questions. One, kind of tagging in on Vin's question about the liability insurance. I was just wondering if any of that increase has to do with all that work done at the library.
All of the work done at the library.
The whole roof, and then they went up there and they found more had to be done, and
Okay. Yeah, I'd have to look at the full report, which I have. But yeah, there were, I would say that in the last 18 months, I'm trying to think of a facility that it didn't have at least one claim. In fact, yeah, the library is on the list that had claims, yes.
okay. And then my other question, it reminded me of it when you said about the 26th police officer. On Facebook, they keep posting about a GoFundMe to get some kind of a dog. And in the GoFundMe thing, it talks about all the things that would be part of the GoFundMe. And then there's a disclaimer, and it said, you know, this one covered the officers' overtime and the officers' training and all of that. Is this an actual thing that the police have requested, this dog? And if the GoFundMe is successful, how much is this going to cost the taxpayers in the additional police officer time?
Yeah, so I would say that at the moment, and I believe the way that the police chief worded it was that they're in an exploratory phase, which would be to say if they're in a position to purchase the dog and all those, that the conversation next will be on sort of operational policy decisions, those types of things that will go through the select board. But they do have a 501c3, I believe, was set up in about 2013, which would be the primary source of collecting the donations. And then the discussion on sort of any operational change and cost to the budget will need to be part of the conversation if this progresses.
But that's not included in this budget, or it's not a consideration in the 26th police officer that you mentioned is still being discussed?
I mean, the budget request from the police chief included the 26th police officer. Whether that gets in the FY22 budget is still to be determined, although I'd be looking for that to be wrapped up as early as next Tuesday night. I mean, as late as next Tuesday night, I suppose. And whether that is a component of it or would play into it, I'm sure it would. And if we were staffed at 25 and the decision were being made to finalize this particular dog and all the things that go with it, you know, and there was 25 instead of 26, then probably OT would be a part of it, but that would be part of the analysis that would be presented with this. Again, I mean, the way it was described to me is sort of the exploration phase of whether this makes sense for the town.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dan?
So I just want to state my support for the sort of experiment with the outsourcing the street sweeper. That said, the numbers to me, I would be shocked if they ended up working out, because you said a net of $10,000 to us for a $250,000 vehicle that has a 10-year average life, so a 25-year payback period. You know, in theory, 25-year not the payback period, 25-year sort of to meet the cost of the equipment for something that's only going to last 10 years seems like the bargain of a century, if that actually sort of is how it works out. That said, as you said, the flexibility of not having it seems like it would also be a pretty big give up potentially. So let's go forward and take a look at. Hopefully the summer should be the right time to do it, right? Because obviously in the winter there's less street sweeping that's needed, except for sort of in emergency cases. But
right.
You know, give it a shot. But I mean, I would be shocked if it came out to be that neat, especially given that I think you said that years 5 to 10 have higher maintenance, so it's actually even a better savings if $10,000 is really the net cost. So, but give it a go.
Okay, Tim?
So this might be more of a comment than really a question. I saw that the tax levy increase would be at 2.6%, and I'm concerned about it. I don't get a lot of neighbors coming up to me saying, "Woo, let's pay more taxes." They usually say quite the opposite. People's salaries don't usually go up 2.5 or 2.6%. So we as a town are collectively taking more and more of their income year after year. And as we've gone through this process this year, and very deliberative, very thorough process of hearing these different needs, and they are needs in town. One of the needs that we are eventually going to have to address is how high our taxes are in town, where we are, depending on which source of information, somewhere between the 85th percentile and the 88th percentile in Massachusetts. So just my comment.
Okay. Okay. So with this, with these adjustments, you see Travis said that, his spreadsheet is showing a slight surplus. I do think it's important to note that and Travis can certainly comment on this, but we all know, and I'm not going to go into details, we all know there are outstanding union contracts, and at the moment, none of them are comprehended, I believe, in his spreadsheet or ours. So that's just something to keep in mind. So, okay. So do you have anything else, Travis, you want to discuss?
I think the capital list was in what I sent out today, and it was, we went through for an hour yesterday with the capital subcommittee. So if there were questions on it, I could get into it. The biggest change from the last iteration you had seen was an addition of HVAC at 1750. That was something that had been on our 5-year plan that we've developed in FY 23-24 that has reared its ugly head, and the facilities manager asked that it be bumped up as early as May. And from a cost standpoint, getting on that roof with the crane related to do it all at once and knock that off the capital list for the next 5 years at least. So that moved up. That was 33.5, was added to May. That wasn't on May or October. It was on a future fiscal year. And then the other major change was swapping the two DPW vehicles. One that was planned for May was the sweeper, which we discussed. It moves to October until we decide if it can be removed or if we need it in October. And then their other second priority vehicle moves to May, which is a fully equipped rack buddy. And so those were the major changes. And if there's any questions, I can get into it. The total amount that comes out of it is now under $500,000 instead of the $600,000 range, which again speaks to the net of the impact to CapEx. But the conversation we had yesterday also was sort of making sure that at least in the $1.75 million range going into CapEx, which was the year prior to COVID, that we are at least able to maintain so as not to backslide. I think based on the conversations when the FinCom is making their budget decisions, and as I said, when I'm finalizing sort of where the select board is next Tuesday, I think that that's attainable. I think we can get to that range. And while the chair mentioned sort of where we are with a couple CBAs, I think we also have numbers that if we need to leave money on the bottom line, we could go that route, or we could go into FY22. Reasonably assuming that any collective bargaining is going to have to be within our means. So, I mean, that's a conversation the town needs to have as a whole, and town meeting is probably going to, because of the timing of some of these items, is probably going to come up in town meeting. But I think, we're at a point where we're just going to have to finalize a budget relatively soon. And I think where I am is if the range that you're looking for is 1.75 for CapEx, I think it's reasonable to assume we can get there. And I think a lot of the conversations that we've had about individual budgets, certainly some of these shoring up of the insurance and the wastewater treatment plant, are ones that are just kind of, are the ones that we have to deal with, and the actual operational conversations. I think we're at a point where those decisions just need to be made. I did send out or have a conversation as it relates to the conversation for Board of Health. It's 9:30, so I'll leave that up to the chair if you'd like to get into that.
How much time do you need?
It depends how many questions are asked. But there's a hand up already before I even get into it.
Okay. I just wanted to bring up the stipend committee thing because Joan sent the
yes.
stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll defer on the Board of Health discussion for now. Then
it's pretty straightforward, though. I don't think there's going to be. I mean, we went over. It's pretty straightforward. I don't think there's going to be a lot of.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So go ahead, Dan. Do you have anything else, Travis, besides that?
No, I mean, voting on budgets would be good, but I understand that you'd like the whole crew here, so that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
So after meeting with us and going back and having their own meeting and doing some work with the new information or the accurate information, I guess, that they had the stipend subcommittee changed or actually decided to put in a recommendation to eliminate stipends, have the policy be that the Holliston does not pay stipends to any elected or otherwise board members, but that the implementation process would be a phase out over essentially 3 years as positions come up for re-election. They did decide that since the decision that they made was made after papers were due, that this year would sort of be the last year. So people elected this year would be the last to receive stipends, but beginning next year they wouldn't. So that is in a nutshell. I mean, Joan has a much better presentation and has a lot more details on some other things that they saw, but she did email out the presentation so everyone can look at that. But in the interest of time, that was basically the summation. My only question to Travis is, since there's not a article in the warrant to specifically accept or implement, sort of, if you will, the recommendation of the stipend committee, the article obviously is the sort of compensation of elected officials that's there. But since the stipends committee is for no change for this year, how do you have a accurate reflection of the will of town meeting and whether that's sort of what they want to happen or not? One thing I had suggested to Joan, but I don't think that was after they made their decision, was that since the incumbent on the assessors is not on the ballot again this year, that they just sort of begin that the person, this election actually would be the first year without stipends. I'm not looking to create waves. I'm just trying to I'm actually looking for sort of a mechanism that town meeting can actually have its, because if all of them are there and people get up and say, hey, I want to vote for this, but I would expect the things to go away. Other people can say, I want to vote for this, but I don't expect things to go away. So they can both vote yes on the same thing, but with different expectations.
Right. Well, the real question there is, given that the select board made the comment in last July that they were going to have the stipend committee and that they were going to come back this May with a recommendation on stipends, and they accepted the first report without comment. I guess the question is the select board going to, now having heard the revised report, put together a recommendation? And that's, again, that's their domain to come up with the recommendation, but it's our domain to know from a budgetary perspective what we have to be potentially planning for. So is this going to come back? Did the select board take any action yesterday after hearing the updated report from the stipend committee?
No, they accepted the report as they did the first iteration.
Okay, so I mean that I think is the real question, right? I mean so as one would hope that before sometime between now and hopefully before all the reports are published, right? There's a
well, ideally we would have a sort of a recommendation by the select board. I mean, we obviously have it in our own purview to make our own recommendations on what we want.
Well, yeah, from the financial perspective, we can make recommendations, but I'm saying that
Anyway, but I'm just looking. I like their sort of compromise. I mean, even though I just think that in the sense of equity, we just get rid of them. But I do understand that there are other sort of thoughts, and they make sense. So I'm okay staggering them, but or not staggering, but phasing them out. But my sort of question is, how does town meeting sort of, if that's what they want, demonstrate?
Right, they have no way of voicing support or objection to that, I guess, is what your point is.
Right, because there's nothing that says do you want stipends or yes or no. It's only, do you want to pay these elected officials, yes or no? And since the recommendation of the stipend committee is to pay them the same as last year, the same dollar amounts as last year, there's no, you can't necessarily take anything away from that.
Yeah. Okay. So what I would say is, well, we can obviously from a budgetary standpoint, discuss how we want to do that, which sounds like there may not be any, but obviously my preference would be it's a select board matter to accept the report and determine what to do from it, right? And that was the promise they made to town meeting last year. So I would assume that they're going to take it up and not just accept it without comment. So
my only point, and the reason I remember this vividly is because it was my first day in Holliston town meeting. My issue last year was that the omnibus budget reflected the removal of $7,500 from the assessor's budget, which reflected the FinCom's recommendation to remove them, but the article that held them, that would have essentially relied on that article to have been turned down by town meeting, which it was not. Mm-hmm. There's a couple things that Sharon and I discussed today. One, the article can change. The article says that it raises and appropriates for those positions, including the town clerk's salary,
right,
which is a
different beast,
having an elected town clerk. Yeah. One thing would be to say that article does not raise and appropriate, but sort of sets the funding level or something like that, so that it is not, because theoretically, right, that article raises and appropriates, as does the omnibus budget. Mm-hmm. Not really a problem, but it's something that could be clarified.
Not really, but in theory, I was going to say, in theory, you could take the $7,500 out of the assessor's budget and say it was raised and appropriated elsewhere. But
right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things we can clarify there in terms of how it would be done to show that the intent, if it's the select board's intent to say, yes, we agree with the stipend committee, and I mean, we could do something similar to how we put in paper last year, the intent of the money that was moved out of overlay, right, is that the idea, select board comment and FinCom comment both mentioned the fact that the intent would be in the long run for it to make it to a future pension liability fund. The comments could reference essentially what you're talking about. I mean, you're right, though. There is no article saying town meeting adopts what the stipend committee has put together. And I don't think, quite frankly, there could have been, because there was one report that came out and then there was another report that sort of undid what the first report did. So I'm glad I don't have an article on there, because I'd be dealing with that. So, but I think there's a couple things that are related to that article that could at least sort of codify it.
Well, my one thought would be simply that we just actually start now, that this election does not receive the stipend, since the incumbent for the assessors, which is the most of it, is not actually running for re-election. And obviously the select board is $50. And so if, that's.
Yeah. But well, as I said, I think that
I don't want to cause a fight over it. Because my more important thing is that we accept the report and we implement the no stipend policy going forward. I just want to make sure that is, if that is the will, that is what is accurately reflected.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle.
I just want to publicly say, though, that it's not my intent that if there's a new assessor, not this year, but like next year, if there's a new assessor who does attend a 1-week session at UMass Amherst, that person isn't compensated for their time.
Right, and that was, just to be clear, that was in the updated report of the stipend committee, right, where they said that the idea of the training on the town's dime should survive, right? But that there is the online option now and so forth, that you don't have to go to UMass for the week and so forth. So, but that's a separate, to me at least, that's a separate discussion, because that's reimbursement for training costs. That's not a stipend, right? So I don't think anybody is saying that people should get elected and then have to pay out of pocket for their own training.
That's course costs and stuff. That's not being compensated for your time.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, thank you.
So the other just thing I would appreciate people thinking about regarding the assessor's budget as we go forward is, based upon the information that we got from Kathy and from the Board of Assessors, I don't personally see why they need that extra money to contract out the assessments. It seems like 500 assessments is easily covered by them annually. In fact, that they do it more often than not. And so I think that's one area that we can take about $22,000 out of that budget and free it up for other other things. Just, we can have a whole conversation about this next week when we go over the whole thing. I just want to put that out there. That's what
I would say that if that's going to be your intention, to try to coordinate with them, because I think there's a lot of things going on as it relates to the assessors in terms of succession planning, in terms of actual position right now that it has become vacant, that, you know, we would be setting ourselves up as a town to be in very bad position if we were unable to get the work done needed to set the tax rate and do a number of other items. So
I understand that, Josh.
I'm not going to get into the merits of that particular conversation, but I think, you know, the conversation about where the assessors are going into a year in which there's going to be turnover is not one just related to that one specific item. I mean, I think the town needs to be prepared for costs in the assessors department for turnover.
Well, that may be, but that's not what the request is for. And the data that, when I asked for more data that they provided us, was wholly unconvincing to me that they needed it. So if the actual request is that they want more money to stash there because they want to, you know, do something, you know, with the staffing of the assessor's office, then that's a completely different conversation.
That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a workflow perspective of that office, we cannot fall behind, right? And whether it's farming out work, having it done internally, those are all sort of conversations about the operations of the assessor's department that I don't think you're fully grasping in what you're talking about right now, that I think, you know, should be a conversation that they're involved in, and not be cutting that out without sort of the discussion about the implications of it.
Fair enough, but we had a very extensive conversation with them, and I was, you know, anyway, the conversation we had with them did not convince me. The data that they sent me afterwards did not convince me. They already have $20,000 in there to outsource some of the money, to some of the assessments. So maybe there's a bet. Maybe I mean. So I don't know if a further conversation with them is going to convince me of something that they already have not, been able to convince me of. So if you can understand it better and can explain it to me better, then let's talk about it next week. But I'm just saying, like, I don't think talking to them is going to change anything, because I'm not getting any. I didn't get anything that, you know, really that helps me with it when we did talk with them. So.
I can speak to it next week.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions for Travis on the budget side? And I know we're running long, so since Chief Cassidy is here, I'll just ask him for a quick COVID update, go back to that since he wasn't here when we got to that agenda item. Then we can go from there. So go ahead, Chief.
Chief Cassidy, I apologize for being late. I was at a different meeting. One additional expense posted to Munis since your last meeting, and the board approved 3 additional CARES expenses at last night's meeting. One for facilities, one for the police department, and one to support the regional vaccination site, which starts operations in Westboro tomorrow.
Now, Chief, one of the things that came up before was, does the whole thing with J&J impact the viability of that vaccination site?
Not at all. Our allocation is 1,500 doses of Moderna. We were never in line to receive Johnson & Johnson. Okay. So we are continuing to forge ahead and start operations tomorrow, and we expect to be in operation till the end of July.
I can say Johnson & Johnson being pulled this morning impacted my morning, because that was what I had a substantial chunk of my day assigned to. So Walmart canceled on me.
Yeah, well, you know, what can I say? Look, it could be worse. You could be, what is it, the president of Argentina or something took was it the Russian vaccine and got COVID or something like that? So and China's admitting that theirs is not very effective, or as effective as it could be or something. So little things here and there. But okay, so case-wise, PP-wise, same thing I ask you every week, right? We're good on all the equipment needs in terms of PPE and stuff for anything going forward at the moment?
That is correct. We're 11 weeks in the yellow, so our case count is pretty consistent. Not really seeing any significant spikes. Saw a few more cases at multifamily dwellings last week. PPE supply, very good, and I still have a federal grant to support the acquisition of PPE that needs to be obligated prior to August. So we're in really good shape.
Okay, good. Anybody have any questions for the chief? So I can tell it's getting late. Everybody starts to kind of fade a little bit as we get, it reminds me of the good old days before most of you were on the committee when we used to go till 11 or midnight.
Yeah, but that was when Bill and Beth were around, and
Yep, that was yep. So you should appreciate the smooth run operation you have that we have now that gets you out of here in only 3 hours. So okay. So anything else for tonight? As I said, time's getting short. We have to start taking votes. And as I said, I was hoping to do that tonight, but for Sue's sake, we'll defer that. But next Thursday we'll plan on meeting. My guess is that I'm not 100% sure we'll get all 7 of us next Thursday, but we'll start taking votes, and we'll take a bunch more votes on the 27th. Between now and next Thursday, I will try to draft a preliminary warrant message to discuss next Thursday, and we'll go from there. And I know Travis has been working with Mary and Sharon to prepare a whole bunch of data stuff for our report. Yes, Michelle.
Are we going to have anything to do with the governance committee warrant articles?
Well, anything to have like
a recommendation or?
We'll make a recommendation on it. I think that, right?
Yes, I think that because there will be a recommendation, yes, for 2 reasons. One is that because I think there are financial, even though not direct financial, like they're asking for money, there are financial implications to what they're suggesting. But even aside from that, even if you ignore the financial component, so to speak, right, since these involve, one of their articles involves changing our role, I think that it's important for us as a committee to have a position on where we think that will be. I've been waiting, partly for the warrant because I want to make sure it's on there, right? Because it's got to make sure, I assume it's on there, but the things aren't finalized with the select board yet. But also, I want to see what the final, I know there were, it's changed a little bit from when they presented to us. So I wanted to wait until the warrant was final to see exactly what the proposal is. And then but between now and our next meeting, obviously, to the extent that we get a copy of that and what the warrant article is going to look like, and if the select board approve it or whatever, if they haven't already, if they do that next Tuesday, then yes, as soon as we say this is, as soon as we know that this is what's going to be on the warrant, I think that it will be incumbent upon us to have a discussion and take a formal voted position on it. So, okay, anything else? Okay, then I will entertain the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, that is not subject to debate. So I will take the roll call vote. Mr. Maxwell?
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Mr. Alfred?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Ms. Zemer?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That concludes the Tuesday, April 13th meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you heard earlier, we will likely be meeting next Thursday, which I guess would be the 22nd. And we'll be meeting on the 27th as well as we finalize our recommendations and our report for the May town meeting. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night.